Retro Hangover, supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We'd especially like to thank patrons Lyle, McKarns, Ashton, Ruby, Randall, Quiggle, Tony G, Studstill Smash the Milkman, Katie Quigg, Paul Romalho, Raging Demon, JC, Meagan, Caruso, MaskedKeaton, Andrew Liguori, Ozzy Garcia, the Retro Vixen, Adam from The Good, the Bad, the Backlog, Lunchbox, aka the Disgruntled Gamer, Dischimera, Jenny E, Rick Firestone, ParallaxPuddles, Soha, Dave Jackson, Keith Gasper, Eric Guest, Kayla Jackson, Nomad from the Retro Wildlands podcast, Ash Event, Alan Bingham, Storm Beagle, Ryan Player One, Mike the Ref from Backbreaker Gaming, and B Ross from Super Garbage Day. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated.
Open your ears, face your fears. You are listening to a very special Spooptober episode of Retro Hangover.
And hello, retro and classic gamers. Welcome to the podcast where we dive deeply, delving dark, describing demolished derps. This is Retro Hangover. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, with special guest, Try from the Backloggery and My Life in Gaming. And, as always, your host, Shane. Scaling Dick Dragon! Koski!
You know, if I had taken the time to properly review our pretentious preamble today, I would have put the scaleless Dick Dragon. That I feel like that makes more sense. Yeah, it was right there, man. You missed it. Yep. No, it's too late now. It's done.
I'm feeling horrible. That's why I'm not saying anything, because that seemed like a layup.
Yeah,
that seemed like a layup.
That was a softball.
On video right now, Shane's complexion looks like Seath, so I think that's pretty accurate.
Dude, I'm trying to figure out why it's so pale, and like my room doesn't even look like that right now. I don't know what's going on.
Well, welcome everybody to the Retro Hangover podcast. Welcome once again, Try. Thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate you.
Yeah,
coming to talk some Dark Souls with us.
No problem. I can't believe we're considering Dark Souls retro. Is that indeed what we're doing here?
We are indeed.
According to our very scientific rules for the show, yes. Also, if that hits you like it does us, then be on the lookout for your AARP cards in the mail.
Yes. If you're thinking the same thing Try is right now, if you're new to the show and you're wondering why is Dark Souls considered retro, it's because our rule is any game over 10 years old. And yes, Dark Souls is over a decade now. So yeah, congratulations.
We could have waited, but I was too eager. Like as soon as it crossed that 10-year threshold, I was just like, Chris, hey, Chris.
Yeah.
You want to play Dark Souls? He's like, no, I don't. I'm like, too bad. We're doing it.
I mean, it's certainly had influence over a large swath of the games that are out there these days, and has, for a generation and a half, or maybe 2 generations almost at this point.
Yeah.
I guess it is in a way retro. Of course, it's not the origin of the Souls-like either.
True.
I've never played the other one. I feel, well, I've never played any of them really, so I'm not going to say I feel bad because the first Dark Souls game I've played. But we'll get into that once we start talking about the episode proper. But before we do, since we are talking a lot about Dark Souls, and we know we want to get there, and if you want to listen to us talk about Dark Souls exclusively, go to about the 15-20 minute mark, and that's where we're going to start talking about it with the brief history. But before we do that, as we are wont to do, we talk about what games we have been playing lately. And as is tradition, we let our guest go first. So, Try, what have you been playing lately?
Oh man, I should be playing Lunar, the Silver Star story complete on PS1. I should be playing that. I'm maybe about 8 hours into it, but I haven't had a chance to get back to it for a couple of weeks. It's been kind of busy here. You know, this is the stupidest thing in the world, but I learned about vampire survivors. If you all are familiar, you know, it's like so stupid and so mindless that's been like, I guess kind of like the ideal game for my frame of mind lately. So yeah, it doesn't really seem like the kind of game that I would normally be into, although it's so Castlevania themed. How can I not be, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So been wasting time in that. But the real game on my now playing right now is the first Lunar.
So I know that was part of your like gaming resolution list that you had at the beginning of this year. How many games have you knocked off? We're getting kind of late into the year right now.
Yeah,
where are we at?
It's going extraordinarily poorly. You know, things like Tears of the Kingdom and Final Fantasy 16 and just being busy in general definitely sidelined that. I've only finished 4 of the 10 that I pledged, and we're in October now. Optimistically, I'm thinking I'm going to be able to finish Lunar 1 and Lunar 2 and Hyperlight Drifter, but that will leave Ys 8, Trails of Cold Steel 1, and Viva Pinata to carry over into next year. And I've already said, even if I have games carry over into next year, I still have to pick 10 more. My gut instinct is like, oh man, I just look at all these RPGs I want to play. I'm going to have to resist that next time and pick, I picked it like this year I played Inside, which really blew me away. If y'all have ever played that, it really blew me away. And I knew the only thing I knew about that game was that it was really short. And so I picked that as like a gimme. I'm going to have to pick a few more gimmies for 2024.
Yeah, Trails of Cold Steel, that is a monster. I love that game. I really do, but that's almost Persona levels of length. Yeah. So that's going to be a tough one.
I'll admit it's not happening this year. It's not happening, but it's going to carry over to next year. I'm holding myself to it.
I feel you. By the way, I hope you love Ys 8 because I have a feeling that that's going to end up on a certain list of mine in a few months.
Well,
because I was very impressed by it.
The top Ys fans in my friend circle all say it's their favorite one. I mean, these are people who've been Ys fans for basically their whole lives, before Ys was even really more widely known. And they're just like, oh my gosh, Ys 8. Yeah.
He's mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm kind of prolonging this, Shane, but he's speaking my love language right now.
No, I get it. You guys have your moment. It's fine. I'm just here watching in the background.
You can get in on this. So what have you been playing lately, Shane?
Hot. Well, mine is definitely not as exciting. That's for sure. No, I mean, predominantly I've been rushing to try to get as much done in the waning days of season 1 of Diablo 4 before that kind of ticks over, which at the time of this recording was yesterday, is when season 2 started. And that's really, it's a self-imposed problem because I put it off, partially because I became a little disenchanted with the game, which if anybody's been following how that's been going, then you might not be terribly surprised. And so I was just like, you know what? Maybe I won't play. And then the monkey brain got the better of me. And I was just like, no, I have to finish. I got to get all the things. So I tried. I did not actually finish the season journey and get all of the battle pass stuff, but that's okay. I did my best. Season 2 is here. Diablo 4 released on Steam, so I have it on Steam now, so that way I can just play it directly on my Steam Deck instead of doing the fun little workaround to get Battle.net working and all that garbage. So that's cool. And there's a bunch of improvements that came with Season 2, so I think the game is on the right path. It's still got a pretty long ways to go, but I have cautious optimism, which I think is like the order of the day for Blizzard just in general. Although I will say one bit of good news recently, and not that I'm one to necessarily champion the creations of like capitalistic monopolies or anything, but Microsoft buying ActiBliz King at the very least means that everybody's favorite CEO, Bobby Kotick, is now out to the door, or at least shortly. So that's a win in my book. So whether or not we actually see things turn around over there at good old Blizz is anybody's guess. Like, my pie in the sky thing for this is it would be just stellar if Microsoft just like pulled the good guy move and tried to hire back like some of the old Blizzard North folks to like try and like reinvigorate the Diablo series. Like, just get David Brevik to come back, you know? I feel like they could do it. I don't know if any of them are going to accept at this point, but like it would be a pretty good gesture of goodwill, in my opinion. But at any rate, so that's really been most of my time, is just trying to kind of crunch through that. Other than that, just kind of fitting in some small things here and there. I still do a few Halls of Torment runs every now and again. That's still being updated pretty frequently. So good stuff going on there. But that's pretty much it for right now. So I don't know. What about you, Chris? What do you got going on besides being the chosen undead?
Yeah, so you pretty much hit the nail on the head. The past couple weeks have been entirely dedicated to try and beat Dark Souls because of reasons I will definitely get into later, because I heard about its length and its difficulty mostly. But I did find some time to sit down and play the game of the month that our review crew has selected, which is Spyro Year of the Dragon. And because we are playing the option to play the Reignited trilogy, I decided to do that because I bought it in one of those bundles last year. So I just have, it's part of my unlimited and lengthening Steam library. So I figured, what the heck, I'm going to fire up some Reignited trilogy and play some Spyro Year of the Dragon. And so far, my initial impressions are it's good, but I'm nauseous.
Huh.
That's how it makes me feel. I don't know what it is. Like, as soon as I started playing, there's this weird thing where the camera, every single time I turn, like the camera just immediately pans in the other direction. I got this feeling. I'm going to mention an extremely obscure game here. Surprise, surprise. There's this game on the PlayStation 1 that I've played like twice, and I've had to put it down because I almost threw up both times. It's called Floating Runner. It's an old game by THQ, very early 3D game. And every single time I play it, I feel like I'm going to throw up. And I'm kind of getting that feeling with Spyro. I can tolerate it a little bit more. But the entire time I'm playing, I'm like, man, I probably should have played the PS1 version, because I don't feel like there's this many shifting fields of perspectives or whatever. Because it's just like that camera likes to just rapidly move in the direction that you're going. And I don't want to say it's rough, because the gameplay is fine for the most part, but I can't help but like get a headache and feel a little sick. So hopefully it gets better. I've put about 2 hours into it. It moves really fast. It's kind of weird how the level progression works, in my opinion. It feels like they're trying to do a Mario 64 thing, but more interconnected. And I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not quite sure yet. Hopefully I beat this soon before the end of the month.
It took me a little while to sort of wrap my head around Spyro, but once I finally did, I was impressed. You know, it always impresses me every time I remember that Spyro 1 came out late enough or far enough along to the PS1's life that it's actually a DualShock game. It supports the DualShock, and you know, and then it went on to have 3 more sequels on the same platform. So Insomniac were pretty prolific on there.
Still are. I mean, they're about to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, they're
release a little game called Spider-Man 2.
Yeah. I mean, they've released like more next gen games than basically anyone in the industry at this point.
Yeah. And do a fantastic job, too. Like really next gen games. I wish I could have the opportunity to play it. I just don't have a PS5 yet. So we'll see. Hopefully in the future. I don't think my PC could support Ratchet and Clank at this point, because only with the power of the PS5's flash memory can that game be truly experienced, I have heard. So we'll see about that, hopefully sometime. But I am now just kind of stalling out because we are here to talk about a game that is dark but full of soul.
Oh.
but not demons.
No.
That was before that. But Hey, Shane.
Hi. Yeah.
Between the two of us, I think that there is no one better to give a synopsis or a brief history of I almost said Dark Souls. Dark Souls.
Wow. It's a Freudian slip if I've ever heard of one.
But why don't you give us a brief history of Dark Souls, Shane?
It's a Souls-like. This is a phrase that pretty much any gamer has heard nowadays when discussing or reviewing a game that has a noticeable difficulty curve or requires a bit of memorization to overcome certain obstacles. Hell, it's even a tag on Steam these days. Before this, the phrase Nintendo hard was more commonly used, a phrase that was used for the very game we're talking about today. But what is the history behind the grandpappy of Get Good, Dark Souls? How did we end up in a world where "you died" was plastered across millions of screens in an era when games were allegedly getting easier to cater to a wider audience? The story goes back to 2006, when a coder at From Software who worked on the Armored Core series decided to take the helm of a failing fantasy action RPG. This developer was Hidetaka Miyazaki, and he envisioned an experience that captured the brutal but usually fair difficulty and no-nonsense design ethos of the games of yesteryear. Drawing inspiration from several different series of note, including Wizardry, Monster Hunter, Bushido Blade, and even From's own Kingsfield, Miyazaki and his team created Demon's Souls, which was published by Sony and released exclusively on the PlayStation 3 in 2009. The game became a surprise hit and quickly built a cult following, revealing the potential for a lucrative follow-up effort. Not wanting to let the opportunity pass, From Software quickly put a direct spiritual successor in motion. But this time, From would dump Sony as publisher and align themselves instead with Bandai Namco. This was, in no small part, a response to Sony's refusal to publish Demon's Souls in the West, where it ultimately gained a sizable portion of its burgeoning fandom. This move would also allow From Software to develop on other consoles, notably the Xbox 360. As a direct spiritual successor, the perhaps not entirely creatively named Dark Souls would feature gameplay mechanics and presentational style much akin to Demon's Souls, with a notable infusion of inspiration from the dark fantasy anime Berserk. Miyazaki also had his team work more independently this time around, giving designers keywords to work with and fashion their own proposals, with Miyazaki putting on the finishing touches. Dark Souls was released on September 22nd, 2011 in Japan for both the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, followed by North America on October 4th and Europe just 2 days later. The game received very positive reviews, with critics praising how rewarding it felt to learn how to take down tough bosses or make it through difficult areas. Many reviewers and publications even went so far as to award it their Game of the Year, and similar recognition in other subcategories. Commercially, the game was also a success. Continuing to thrive on the cult status Demon's Souls had already achieved, Dark Souls would surpass it and sell over 2.5 million units worldwide. The series continued to grow and received 2 sequels, as well as 2 spin-offs, Bloodborne and Elden Ring, perhaps the biggest game of 2022. It also created its own genre, now referred to as Soulsborne. Dark Souls received an improved version on the PS3 and 360 in 2012 called the Prepare to Die edition, and remasters for the PS4, PC, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch in 2018. And that is your brief history of Dark Souls.
Shane, for that brief history. I have to look at this brief history and think to myself, looking at Miyazaki's history of video games, apparently he didn't play video games until he played Ico for the PS2 is something that I read.
Interesting.
In his background. I severely doubt that because first of all, he has this love for games that were difficult and used wizardry as an example of that, which wizardry is very old series.
Right.
The other thing is, I'm just making a bet here. I bet, because I looked at his age, he had to be 11 in 85 when Xanadu came out for the PC 88. Xanadu is a very brutal and unfair game, which is kind of a dark fantasy. I'm not saying he played that. I'm not saying he had inspiration from it, but I'm willing to bet there's some roots there because after playing this and seeing a review, I watched a review from of Xanadu from Basement Brothers, a YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, like I can see how this inspired a lot of dark fantasy RPGs. I just went off on a wild tangent. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. And maybe you are all less intelligent for hearing that. But this is something that I definitely feel, especially looking at the art design. I'm feeling this connection. Maybe it's just my Falcon bias.
No, I mean, you know what? I like it. I'll accept that as your headcanon. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see what he said about Eco. I can see some inspiration there just in sort of the washed out colors and sometimes like occasional like overexposure of the camera, the virtual camera in some scenarios. But the game that really comes to mind when I think of, old games that most remind me of Dark Souls is really like Castlevania. Because the thing that makes Dark Souls, or one of the many things that makes it so appealing to me, the whole Souls-like formula, is just how extraordinarily deliberate the placement of every single enemy is.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me think of games like, Castlevania was extremely good at that. Other platformers, one that I always champion is Ninja Gaiden 3. The previous Ninja Gaidens were known for having relentlessly respawning enemies at the edge of the screen, but Ninja Gaiden 3 was completely different. I know it's criticized for the difficulty of the North American version, but in both the American and Japanese versions of that, the enemies are so deliberately placed and there's this flow through the levels that just feels so great and satisfying to learn your way through. And, that's very much the same kind of joy that I get out of the Souls games.
I could see that. I can't wait to both praise and be very, very angry here when we get to gameplay. Let's start off with the personal experience, and I think I'll kick this off because I know I definitely have the smallest base here, just because this is the first time I've played any Souls game, well, worth any time, because I played Bloodborne for like 30 minutes and turned it off because I said, I'll get back to it, and I got distracted. Like, oh, butterfly. In terms of Dark Souls itself, this came out in 2011. So during that time, I was up in Great Lakes. I was division commander, so I had no time to play video games anyway. And I was on a big BioWare kick. So when I was playing video games, it was Mass Effect or it was Dragon Age Origins. very, very long games. And then I think the game after I played after both of those in 2012 was Xenoblade Chronicles. So Dark Souls didn't really come across my radar. I didn't have a lot of time to play video games, and I was playing very long video games that wouldn't allow me to play a game like Dark Souls anyway. And in fact, it kind of just flew under my radar because I was just so obsessed with the Mass Effect series. But I think was it like Dark Souls 2 or Dark Souls 3? Is that when it got really memeable on the internet? And that's when I started to pay attention to it, when I won't say every single YouTube video, but a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of like the social media interaction had the whole entire "you died" meme across a lot of their media. And I got a PS4, and a lot of people were saying that Bloodborne was a really good game. I delved into that, not knowing anything about Dark Souls. So maybe I'm kind of happy I didn't do that, because I would have hated it. So who knows? Because I didn't know what I was going to be in for. But aside from that, yeah, my Dark Souls experience is limited to, as an extreme outsider, listening to everybody in our online community talk about how much they love it. Podcasts, YouTubers, personal friends like Shane here, over and over and over again talk about how amazing Dark Souls is. I am glad I got to experience it, at the very least, for this episode. And I look forward to talking about it with both of you here today. So that's my personal experience. How about yourself, Shane? And we'll let Try wrap this personal experience section up.
Yeah, I think the most amusing thing about all of this is that as much as I evangelize for Dark Souls these days, I actually began my personal journey with the Souls series absolutely hating the living shit out of it. Yeah. All right. So let's go back. So I was not really aware of this game when it first came out. Maybe like tangentially, I probably heard the name or something, but I knew nothing about it. I was not really connected to anybody that knew anything about it, anybody who played Demon Souls. So it was not even on my radar at all. And it wasn't until, I want to say, probably trying to think, because I remember I didn't play it for the first time until I moved down here to Florida. So it would have been probably, I want to say around 2013, 2014, somewhere around there is when I finally came around to playing Dark Souls. And I picked it up for my 360 and I bought it digitally. I bought it on the Xbox Arcade and went into it blind, basically. I think it was like on sale or something. And at that point I had heard enough about it that I was just like, oh, all right, whatever. Let me give this a try, see what this is all about. That in and of itself was a fairly big step, because I already had this very preconceived notion of what Dark Souls was, based purely on the online discourse around it. So like the get good mentality and the like, oh, well, it's brutally difficult, but that's just because you suck and you need to get good and blah, blah. So there was that whole thing. And honestly, that turned me so far off from the game at all. I was just like, oh, this sounds like a bunch of elitist assholes. I don't want to have anything to do with this. This sounds like shit. And so I had a very negative outlook on Dark Souls just in general, based purely on that, having nothing to do with the game itself. It was like this toxicity around it that I thought existed, and to some degree I think did / still does, but probably not to the degree that I thought it was. And so I went into it being like very begrudging. I was just like, all right, fine, let me see what this is. I looked up nothing about it. I went in cold, and I think that first character I made, I want to say I might have made it to Blighttown, and I think that might have been the farthest I got, and it might even have been before that. So I didn't get super far into the game, and honestly, in retrospect, my character sucked. Like, I built it terribly, so that didn't help. And I kind of put it down, and I don't know, I just got really frustrated with it, and I was like, you know what, whatever, okay, it's fine. And I didn't really think too much more of it. And it wasn't until a number of years later that I revisited it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to give this another shot. I've heard so many good things about it. And I think at that point I picked it up for PC because I think the Prepare to Die edition had come around by that point and it was available on PC as well. And so I played it that way. And that time, I don't know what was different. I don't know if it was a different mindset. I will say that some of it was a little bit of legwork beforehand to get my head around how to not make a terrible character. I think that helped a lot, actually. But once I did that and I really gave it time, dude, it just clicked. Like, I don't know what exactly it was, but everything clicked for me and I couldn't stop playing it. And then I beat it and I went and started playing New Game Plus. I was just like, I friggin' love this. I can't get enough of this. This is amazing. And ever since, and that kicked it off. And from there, I went and played 2. I played 3. I went and bought Bloodborne when I got PS4 finally. And then obviously Elden Ring later. And so that just kicked this whole thing off. And now I have nothing. Well, not nothing. I have mostly good things to say about Dark Souls. But yeah, it was really just like this weird light switch moment. I don't know, man, where it just went from like, dude, this sucks and I don't want to have anything to do with it to this is literally one of my favorite games ever. Like, it's crazy. I can't think of another game that I've played where that's happened. So anyway, that's my personal experience.
Yeah. Only one game was like that for me, and that was Mass Effect. So I can understand. I can completely understand where you're coming from. Like, nope, putting this down and then let me give it another try and just completely falling in love. So yeah, I can relate on that front. How about yourself, Try?
So for me, I started at Demon Souls. I didn't get it right away. There was a bit of a gap between it coming out in Japan in early 2009 and late 2009 here. So I don't remember exactly when I got it because I know I didn't get it right away, and it was published by Atlus. And, Atlus at the time, this certainly isn't the role that they play in the industry today, but at the time, Atlus was kind of seen as like the savior of games that would otherwise have never left Japan. They would have never been given a chance on the Western market. And oftentimes their games became a bit rare because, they were for a more niche audience, which is crazy to think about. That was the perception of what Souls could be and to where it is now.
Oh, yeah.
I think I remember hearing about like a reprint or something. And I honestly couldn't tell you what led to my interest in it. For one, just the Atlus name, they usually pick up pretty good games for publishing. And 2, sometimes I have a bit of a soft spot for like really generic looking fantasy stuff, even though it's kind of not that, but like on the surface, like the box art's just this guy in like, European medieval armor and you don't see his face or anything. Right. So that was like very much kind of my image of what is this. And I was like, I'll give this a try. I'm a big NES fan. The NES is my favorite console. I love games that, as I mentioned before, have extremely deliberate enemy placement, games where it feels good to learn your way through it, even if it requires some memorization, some failure, and then learning to do better and better and better. And I think it was that loop of, this is hard, but it also gives you that motivation of, what, I died, but all it's asking me to do is get at least as far as I got the last time. I don't have to do any better than that. I just have to get to at least as far as I got last time and everything's okay. So that kind of hooked me, and I absolutely loved it. I did not start a New Game Plus right away like your experience finishing Dark Souls, Shane. I've actually never done New Game Plus in any of the Souls games. I've played some of them. I've played Demon Souls, like including the remake, at least 3 times total. Dark Souls I've played, I believe, twice. Bloodborne maybe twice, and then the others just once. But I've never done. Dang it, my view of what a New Game Plus is Chrono Trigger. That introduced me to New Game Plus, and New Game Plus is supposed to make the game easy. But no, New Game Plus today is like, okay, now it's harder. It's like, no, that's not what a New Game Plus is.
It's hard mode.
I mean, if it makes you feel any better, New Game Plus in Dark Souls is actually pretty easy up until like 4 Kings. So it's not too bad.
Maybe I'll consider it someday. It's not that I'm afraid. It's just like, I don't like them calling New Game Plus that. That's not what New Game Plus is to me. But now that is what New Game Plus is.
I love that is like a very specific gripe. I appreciate that.
I don't think I've complained about this many times. I've never heard anyone say, yeah, I get
it. Oh, no. I get it. I totally get it. Sorry to interrupt here, but like, that was one of the things I asked Shane when I got done with the game, because one of the things that I started playing and I got to the first demon in the asylum, the very first demon that you fight, the big guy who looks like the stray demon.
Yeah.
I started fighting him and I beat him. So he was, in my mind, beatable, but like I should have been just thwacking this dude because you beat him pretty easily the first time you go through, and once you learn the plunge attack, and then he falls after a few dodges and a few attacks. But I had a really good great axe with very high strength, and it still took me a little while to kill him. I'm like, hey, Shane, do they scale? Like, what's going on here? And he's like, oh yeah, like they totally like leveled everything up. I'm like, huh, I don't think I want to do this.
Yeah. I probably did the same thing, but yeah. So, because of my experience with that game, I loved it. I was a day one Dark Souls purchaser. I definitely think it got a lot more buzz because they brought in that Xbox 360 audience. PS3, when Demon Souls came out, PS3 was only like just starting to get over its like really bad announcement messaging and really botched launch. Even when PS3 started getting games, it had a really hard time shedding like the lol PS3 no games sort of mindset.
Yeah.
Especially in America. I think PS3 was always ahead in Japan and Europe.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, definitely Japan. I think even in Europe.
Yeah.
But Xbox 360 was like, they had a pretty easy time, especially early on, going against the PS3. And Sony really turned the PS3 around big time, but it was still battling for, a rehabilitated public perception. So yeah, that definitely expanded the audience. And it was interesting because I think something that a lot of people kind of forget or don't know is that like the real hardcore Demon Souls players, which even though I loved the game, like I was never like of the get good crew either. I'm going to be honest with y'all. In all of these games, like I've never learned to play like a heavy armor character. I've always been like into nimble dodging. I almost always end up making my main weapon a spear because you can hold up your shield while using a spear. I'm a big chicken in these games. I love them, but I've never been like a get gooder. But I noticed that the really hardcore crew were saying like, oh, Demon Souls is actually the much better designed game than Dark Souls. But I think Dark Souls still became the much more well-known game, much more widely discussed game because of that expanded audience with the Xbox 360. But what really made Dark Souls for me, what made it stand apart from Demon Souls and why it is my favorite one of the Souls likes is that world design, that interconnected world. Demon Souls is much more level based. It is non-linear, but it's kind of got like a Mega Man situation where you have this hub and you choose like which level you go to and stuff like that. And there's like, different checkpoints within each one. Whereas Dark Souls, I maybe gain a bit ahead, but it is, in terms of just the world design, that's what really makes it special because everything just fits together in this beautiful way. And I kind of consider it like maybe the best, what I would call sort of Metroidvania type design in 3D. In terms of that interconnected world, it's back before people called them Metroidvanias, I called it one big level, Yeah. And that's kind of what Dark Souls is this one big interconnected level. And the way it is laid out is like so much more memorable, I feel, than almost any other game world. Like you just can sit back and think like, I like think of a path in that game and it's like, well, that goes this way and that way. And then it actually opens up a shortcut back to this other area. And there's so many moments, and this is what I live for with that Metroid style world design, is all those moments where it's like, oh, this place, like I had no idea I was so close to here. Like, I can't believe that opened up a shortcut to there. Just those moments are like so magical to me. And Dark Souls is just full of those. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. Felt like Dark Souls 2 was really weak on the world design and interconnectedness in the same sense. And I thought Dark Souls 3 was
You don't say.
Oh, yeah.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Chris has heard me rant about the like floating ghost elevator.
I've seen illustrations that show like how logical everything fits together in Dark Souls 1. Then I've seen like the same type of map drawn for Dark Souls 2. And it's just like, there should not be a whole freaking volcano there.
Yes.
That cannot be there.
That one. It's like, yeah, what if you went up this windmill and then took an elevator that can't possibly exist in this space and somehow end up in a volcano? What?
You get Keith Courage in Alpha Zones.
Dark Souls 3, I thought, like, at the time I was playing it, I'm like, this is every bit as good as Dark Souls 1. I love it, but I only played Dark Souls 3 that one time, and it hasn't stayed with me in the same way that the first Dark Souls did. And I played Bloodborne. I loved Bloodborne as well. I'm kind of behind on catching up on Souls though, because I've booted up Elden Ring, but I haven't started playing through it. Really want to. But I also started Sekiro, which I noticed was kept off of your history of the series, but it is admittedly a rather different game because it doesn't have the online component. And that's part of what scares me because, like I've said, I've never been a get gooder. And while I've generally done the levels in the Souls games by myself, I've relied heavily on the online component for bosses. And I've always like left my sign down to be summoned before a boss, practice the boss, gain a few levels fighting the boss for other people. And then when I'm feeling confident, it's like, okay, now I'll summon people and do my own run. That's definitely kind of scared me about Sekiro. So I'm kind of like back and forth on like, should I just go ahead and play Elden Ring or should I go start Sekiro over again and get through that?
You should just go play Elden Ring.
Sekiro seems pretty good though.
Okay, see, my gripe with that is that it's part of the reason why I never actually finished Bloodborne is because the design ethos moved significantly from where they were with the Dark Souls trilogy and Demon Souls and moved way more in a very like twitchy parry based gameplay.
That's very true.
And
very true. And Sekiro,
I'm not about that life. So
I typically don't like parrying systems in game. Like if you can let me get away with dodging instead of blocking and parrying, I'll dodge 100% of the time. That's why I always say in these games, I go for a lighter character build.
Yeah.
But when a game forces you to do that kind of parrying, and I get it, it does work for me. And in Bloodborne, it took a little bit for me to learn, but I did get into it. And, a friend who was, really, really into all of the Miyazaki games watched me stream the beginning of Sekiro. And he was like, you're actually catching on to this a lot faster than I thought you would. The parrying system is very satisfying in that, but it is intimidating. It is intimidating. So that's a tangent about all of the Souls games and where I am at.
Well, Chris knows that's part of the reason that I maybe was not as hot on Metal Gear Rising in some spots because I got through pretty much that whole game and still was absolute dog water at the parrying, and that carries across games. I am just like categorically not good at like parry systems at all, evidently. Yeah. So
I'll talk about that. And for the record, I'm on the record for saying I like the parry system in Metal Gear Rising.
Yeah.
So I cannot wait to talk about the parrying here. This is going to be going to be great.
Like I say, if a game like more or less forces you to learn it and it is a good system, then I'm okay with it. But if it's like, you could take it or leave it. You don't have to do it. You can still beat the game without it. Then like 100% of the time, there's no way I'm going to learn to use it if it's not absolutely imperative.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. And I do feel ashamed now because I did completely forget about Sekiro. Damn it.
It is. I mean, it's the most different aesthetically and thematically.
Oh yeah.
Also, it doesn't have that online component, which I think makes it a very different game.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but let's move right into the plot story. We're getting to the gameplay. It sounds like we're itching to get there. I think we all are. But we're going to get into the plot and writing here, the story, because there is one, apparently. What did you all think about that?
Don't intro this segment that way.
Don't boo me. I know there's a story here because I can look it up everywhere else. But Shane, tell me why I'm wrong. Apparently,
this is one of the reasons that I love Dark Souls so much, is because it's not, typical JRPG that just slaps you in the face.
It's not a JRPG
with a wall. I didn't say that it was. I'm making a comparison, Chris. That it's not a game like a JRPG that generally likes to slap you with a big wall of exposition. This game does not do that. And that's part of the mystique. That's part of what drew me into this so much was, and somebody else, I can't take credit for this because someone else said it, but I really like the way that they put it. And that is that learning the plot or experiencing the plot of Dark Souls is not a passive experience. And I like the way that they put that because it's true. You have to actively search out a lot of those details, but the game, in its sort of almost inadvertent way, makes you want to do that because you're basically thrust into this world with very little context other than the one expositional cutscene you get at the beginning with the voiceover that kind of explains at least some of the high level concepts of things that occurred leading up to you being in, the undead prison. And that's really all you get. But then if you really take the time to listen to the NPCs that you meet along the way, a lot of the just environmental storytelling that occurs just from seeing the things that you are experiencing as you make your way through the world, and the descriptions of the various items and weapons and pieces of armor and things like that flavor text, to kind of use my Magic the Gathering vernacular here for a second, but like the flavor text on these things, that's where you start to piece together a lot of this. And it's purposefully opaque, like it's obfuscated for a reason and it's left open-ended. And that's all of that put together could be a complete shit show. It could be disastrous, if it wasn't executed well. But in my opinion, it is. I think this is executed wonderfully here, because one of the things that really got me into not only this game, but just the Souls series in general, was wanting to know more about the lore behind this game. Like, what happened? Who are these people? Who are these figures? Why is this occurring? Why am I trying to do these things? Are my supposed goals that I've been told I have, are they actually legitimate? Am I being led astray? Like, are there other viewpoints? There's so much around it, and they've done such a fantastic job of like world building without just leaving you like fucking journals laying around on tables, right? Like it's just so well done. It's like, after finishing the game, like, I will admit, I didn't fully understand even a lot of what was going on, but in a way that was okay, because it left me with this like thirst for more, that I wanted to know more. So like I went on this like real deep dive of like lore analyses and like YouTube videos and all this stuff, because I wanted to know more about what was going on in this world. And that applies to not only all the Dark Souls games, but also Elden Ring, same deal. I went down a rabbit hole with that one too. So there's a lot more than what's on the surface level. You could arguably, and I'm sure it sounds like you probably did. I think the typical experience in Dark Souls for most people is to play through the game, and I won't even say typical experiences to finish it. That might arguably not true. I don't know, but get through the whole experience and still not really have a clear idea of exactly what you did or why or how any of that matters or what the consequences of that are.
Yes.
But like, I don't know, that's part of what's so alluring about it, is because there's just enough there to make you want to know more about it. And if you go digging, even if you don't go to YouTube, if you just go digging in the game itself, you can start piecing all of those things together. And it's part of, this is one of those few games. It's like this and the Diablo lore and like Silent Hill 2. If anybody that's listening to this has listened to our Silent Hill 2 episode, you know that that's one of those games where like I'm a huge, just complete lore nerd on it. Apparently people liked that because they've wanted to listen to that episode. But this is one of those where like I'm so invested in like the world that they built, largely because of how they presented it.
I very much disagree with comparing it to Silent Hill 2.
I'm not comparing it. I'm saying for me personally, these are the games that I am invested in from a lore perspective. I'm not comparing them.
I mean, hey, I'm into Kirby lore, you know?
See, there you go.
Hey, everyone has the lore. Everyone has the lore. I thought you were saying like it was told in the same way. I'm like, whoa, no.
No, not at all.
No, it's not even close.
No, no, that's two completely different things.
Because I already tipped off kind of my negative feelings here. Before we get to those, and I won't say they're negative, just a little, maybe I will, maybe I won't. We'll find out. But what did you think of this writing style, the way they delivered the plot?
I mean, this is simultaneously like something that I like respect the heck out of, but has also never clicked with me personally. Like none of what has happened in Souls, and even though I've like casually looked at a few lore things here and there, like none of it has really stayed with me. It is that world, the atmosphere, and those things have stayed with me. But the actual what and who and where and why and how, that's not really solid in my brain. But it really is interesting how under the surface it is and how unafraid they are to put that stuff under the surface. Like, Shane, you might be able to help me here, but like one thing that I think of is how people pointed out, like they're like one of the like characters that they talk about in the opening FMV, like I think it was like the Pixie or something.
The furtive pygmy.
Yeah. And it's like, and then like you get to the end of the game and you're like, wait, like that was not a thing that came up anywhere at any point. And then I think if I'm remembering correctly, I could be remembering wrong or I could be mistaking it for a different character. But like there's something that like, oh, like this ring has like a description on it that like might imply something about that one thing that was important enough to mention at the opening FMV, but not be explicitly appear at any other point.
Yeah. Okay. That's actually a really good example, because I feel like they knew what they were doing with that one too, because even
they did. I really think they did.
Well, yeah, because like even in the intro like exposition that you get, like I'm assuming some crone or witch character, the one doing the voiceover, she says something to the effect of like the furtive pygmy so easily forgotten.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. But the thing is like the great thing about that is that, and part of this honestly is for the pygmy specifically, a lot of that doesn't really start to get pieced together until you get the Artorias DLC. And a lot more of that background is kind of, I won't say fully explained, but it's fleshed out more there. And there's some very heavy implication that the pygmy is Manus, the one that sort of like manifested the abyss when the denizens of Ulasil went and start trying to dig for like the dark soul. That's sort of the implication, and that the furtive pygmy and Manus are kind of one and the same. And the pygmy is like the progenitor of humans, like in this particular realm. So, yeah, but no, it's funny that you point that one out, because I feel like they were very on the nose about that.
I remember that being a thing, but again, the explanation when it went over my head, or at least didn't, imprint on my brain. But at the same time, I respect the heck out of the fact that, hey, I can love a good cutscene heavy game now and then. But I also really respect the fact that the story never gets in the way of the gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
But it still does have a story. It still does have lore. It has all these things, but it supports the gameplay, never takes away from it, never, anytime there is a cutscene, it's like super, super brief. And I also respect that it is a type of storytelling that literally only a video game can do. Couldn't do this sort of discovery-based storytelling in any other medium. I've said things like that in the past about, you kind of mentioned, journals, when journals and log books and stuff and scanning, the tablets and Metroid Prime and stuff like that started becoming a thing. Like, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool because this is like only something you can do in a video game. But in a sense, you kind of can. I mean, there's lots of books that are like, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that are, compilations of letters and things like that. So in a sense, like, it doesn't deviate too far from what you can do with other mediums. But I really do think that, discovering things in your environment, discovering information about objects you found, that's really something that can only be feasibly done through the medium of video games. And I think that anything that can only be done through video games is something that video games should do, that helps them stand out, that helps them do unique things, that plays to their strengths. But yeah, it's never the actual story content of Souls has never clicked with me. It's never even really clicked with me. Like, why does the world didn't always work this way, did it? Where people die and then they're ghosty, undead, something or others. It didn't always used to be that way, right? What are the mechanics of why this is this way now? Even that has never really totally clicked with me, but it's just like, okay, I like this world. I like the gameplay. I like the atmosphere. I like everything about it. Story, not so important. The lore does intrigue me, but it's just never solidified for me.
Well, I think so. Okay. One thing that you just mentioned right there, you put it into words in a way that like it kind of clicked with me because it was something that was rattling around in my head, but I couldn't quite like enunciate it. But I think part of what also really attracted me to the story and world building that Dark Souls does is the fact that it is very like unapologetic about how it presents it, in that it's just like, these things exist. That's it. Like, we're not going to sit here and try to explain all of this to you. You're just kind of plopped in this world where these things just are. And like, I think it lends this sort of sense of like, it lends this like feeling of everything is very lived in, or was, I should say, lived in. And so now you're in this, like the waning years of, what once was this civilization. And I think that's part of the draw for me, was wanting to know how it got to where it is now. Like, when you show up at Firelink Shrine, things have been already in progress for hundreds or thousands of years, and everything feels very lived in, because no one is sitting there being like, well, let me tell you about this and this, and here's this scroll that tells you all of this history and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, anybody else that exists in this world is either trying to kill you or just acts like you should already know all of this stuff. And there's something to that it was just like, I don't know, it's just very appealing to me.
And speaking of characters talking, there is some talking. And something that has always stood out to me is unique about the Souls games is the voice acting doesn't feel like other games. I don't know how much of this necessarily is conveyed from like Miyazaki to the English voice director. I assume it is, because there is a consistent sort of voice tone to these games where the characters like speak often in very soft, a very soft manner, often, you know, long pauses. Sometimes the acting can be like simultaneously hammy and also very unusually real feeling. Like I don't know.
Unsettling.
Yeah, it's unsettling is a good way to put it. It doesn't feel like normal video game voice acting. Things aren't strongly enunciated. There's just something unsettling is a very good way to put it. Yes. But yeah, even though you do have those characters there telling you these things, this is certainly no Kojima game where literally, you know, everything, like things that you never even thought to ask a question about. Oh, some character in the game is going to tell you all about the history of that one thing. I mean, in a sense, like, I don't know if y'all have played Death Stranding.
I have not. No.
But Death Stranding kind of, in a sense, like kind of starts like Souls, where you are in this weird post-apocalyptic world. The rules of how the world and life works is like not at all recognizable to what we experience is in real life. And it seems like almost like something there where there could be no plausible explanation. And I don't know why I doubted that a Kojima game would not have an explanation, but it totally does. Dark Souls does not go that route. Dark Souls does, you know, leaves you guessing, leaves you thinking, leaves you pondering, leaves you coming up with your own conclusions.
Yeah. I think this game, or I guess the series as a whole, but since we're specifically talking about Dark Souls, like, I feel like this is one of the few, if only, games where I could say that it's like the vocal equivalent of the Uncanny Valley.
Oh, yeah. Where it's like,
that's a good point.
It's like, you know, something like, I've had a lot of friends who like, I feel like a lot of people who maybe don't play a lot of video games, but like don't play a lot of games today, like sometimes they come back for big event games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example. And I've had friends who, you know, don't play, you know, all the new games and aren't maybe used to hearing what like modern video game voice acting is like. They say like, I don't like the voices in this, but they do, like, even though it's like a, you know, a much more, you know, high budget, high fidelity game. Yeah, they do. They sound like typical video game voice acting in that game. And then you're right. Dark Souls inches closer and closer and closer to that sort of realistic, sort of real life acting, but it's not quite there. So it's like, you're right. It's unsettling. You know, I recently learned a term. I don't know if I've even seen a movie like this, but I recently learned that there's a genre of movie called mumblecore. Are you familiar with this? I think it's like something that like a lot of like sort of like low budget, you know, artsy indie directors do, where, you know, people, I guess, are speaking in these like sort of just a very realistic way. You know, you're not doing movie enunciation. You're not doing video game script enunciation. You know, this is maybe almost like the video game dark fantasy version of mumblecore. I don't know if that's an apt description or not, because it's not a genre of movie I'm familiar with, but I thought the name was funny.
I would love to call it a mumblecore like.
Oh my God.
The start.
I think the other thing that contributes to that sort of pervasive, like unsettling feeling that you get from pretty much all of the NPCs that you talk to in Dark Souls is, and I don't know if you noticed this like explicitly, but I think not every, but almost every NPC ends most of their dialogue with a laugh.
And it's like, it's this desperate, like, I'm trying to pretend that everything is not bad kind of laugh.
Unless they're in duress.
Yeah, they range generally from what feels like almost like a nervous laughter to like a almost threatening, and it's somewhere in between there most of the time.
Yes.
If they're in duress, they don't.
Yeah.
Then you do not hear a laugh. But when it's usually just casual talk, then yes.
Yeah. And that was actually one of the things I remember noticing first when I really got my first like full playthrough of the game, was how odd and honestly unique that was, that almost everybody that I ended up actually talking to in this otherwise desolate world honestly kind of sounded like they were all like 2 steps away from insanity.
What they are.
Well, yeah.
Well, some of them about 10 steps beyond insanity.
True.
Yes.
True.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna take my stab at it here. And in terms of the plot, Shane, I very much respect what you say, and much like Try, I respect it. But I'm glad that we've brought up already, the 8-bit comparison here, the NES comparison here. And we've brought up in terms of gameplay, which we'll be talking about next, but this also really applies in terms of storytelling. The beginning intro is something that you would read out of an NES manual, really. It just tells you the background about all the characters that have done things. And you have to go and kill these bad guys. You know that you have to encounter bad guys and kill them, and they're bad because of the reasons that the intro told you. And you can go the entire game with that mentality. Why are you going after King Gwyn at the very end? Well, you were told to. He's the bad guy. You got to go kill him. Do you really need to know anything more than that? Not really. You don't. You don't need to know anything more than that. And the only reason I even look into any of the lore is because when you go fight Sif the Great Wolf, everyone's like, oh, that's so sad. If you don't know anything about that, you do not care about that wolf. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people are going to be very upset.
I'll agree that it's like the only reason I felt bad about killing the wolf was because, he's a cute doggy, right?
It's a cute dog.
I was sad about that, but I didn't know nothing about the story.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And when it gets low on health, it looks like it's wincing in pain when it's attacking you with the sword and it's dragging it more. It's very sad. That's sad. But I'm not saying like, oh, it was just trying to be a good doggo. Like, I don't see that. And then people are like, well, this is why. I'm like, oh, okay. But the game doesn't tell you that. And you don't have to know that. You don't have to know any of these things, even though there's weird things like, why am I fighting a butterfly? Why is this a boss? This makes absolutely zero sense.
It looks cool.
I'm not saying it's not cool. It just doesn't make sense. But one of the things that I do want to bring up, and I think we are all Final Fantasy 13 apologists. I think we all like Final Fantasy 13. One of the biggest criticisms about Final Fantasy 13 is how that game tells its story. It gives you a bunch of concepts that you don't understand, and it throws them at you all at once and expects you to just absorb it and consume it to such a degree that by the end of the game, things make sense. I think that you can get through Final Fantasy 13, by the way. I know kind of a tangent here, without having to read all the little logs that you have. But those logs do provide.
And to be fair, Final Fantasy 13, I think, makes your access to that information a lot more accessible,
apparent.
Even if, it doesn't rely on you finding, some item you might never find.
Yes. Dark Souls does the same thing Final Fantasy 13 does, but with items. And you have to actually sit there and read the items description. And the only way I figured this out is when I was trying to put on, at some point in the game, I was trying to put on Solaire's equipment, and I saw a little description about that gave you some information about Solaire that kind of amplified what was going on with him, that he might be more than a character to that. And that's because it's told through items. Now, the difference between, Final Fantasy 13 and Dark Souls is, once again, in Dark Souls, you don't need to know this information to understand what's going on. You don't need to understand what's going on to get through the game. So in that aspect, it's fine. Again, very 8-bit, very Nintendo way of getting through the game, where I am told my objective at the beginning of the game. That objective does not have to change. There's no major plot twist. I just get to the end of the game. I'm happy. I'm satisfied. It doesn't have to make sense. This is just a grueling battle all the way through from start to finish. And that's what I feel about the plot and the writing. There are some things that don't make sense, like Law Trick. Like you have to figure that out outside of that, because you come back to the Fire Shrine and a character's gone. And you get an item, and then you get to another port in the game, and it tells you that this thing is quivering. You use it. All of a sudden, you go in and you fight Lautrec, and then you can use an item in there to resurrect this other character. You can kind of piece together what happens, but it doesn't really tell you any of those character motivations. In that essence, yes, Shane, that's the subversive storytelling that makes you want to find out more about those characters, more about that lore, more of what's going on and why they might be doing it. I can completely understand that. But at the end of the day, as good as the writing might be, as good as the lore might be, for your average player playing Dark Souls, it is largely irrelevant. Even if it is very finely crafted. And some of the things I've looked into and how Miyazaki put everything together, it is like extraordinarily crafted with a level of detail that goes into character designs and environments and the items you sell and how they interact with other players. That's incredible, but you don't need to know that. There's nothing about it that's inherently important in order to get through the game or make you want to finish your objective. You're just kind of like, oh, well, this is over. Congratulations. You know, you beat the game, you win. Much like, it's kind of like beating ghouls and ghosts. I don't need to know why I'm going to finish the bad guy of ghouls and ghosts. I just know that that's the bad guy, and it gives me a congratulations. And it sucks getting there, but once you get there, you feel really good about it. And that's what's important. So yeah, that's my feelings on it. It's not really negative. It's not really positive. It's just, it exists. And if you want to do more with it, it's there for you.
I think that's a fair assessment. I don't disagree with you at all, actually. Honestly, I think it's okay. Like, I think your experience, or actually, I think to some degree, both of yours experiences and mine kind of represent both sides of this, right? And I actually think that's a point in the game's favor, frankly, because the story, you're right, you don't need to care. But that's okay. Like, you can still play the game, enjoy it for the gameplay, enjoy it for the experience and experiencing the world that they've crafted. And that's it. And that's fine. The story is not like it doesn't obstruct that experience for someone who doesn't want to, or just doesn't want to connect with the story, or it just bypasses them, which honestly, frankly, is fairly easy to do with how they've presented it. It's easy to miss a lot of things. If you don't get that bug, if it doesn't hook you like it did for me to want to know more about those things and to want to dig more into it, then that's also perfectly valid. So I think the fact that it's not obtrusive and it exists as sort of this seamless part of the world itself, but also in a strange way, sort of as its own separate thing, in that it's so intrinsic to everything that exists in the game, but is not necessary for you to actually experience the game from start to finish. I think that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
Now, something that has crossed my mind related to things that both of you have said, which might in some ways actually serve as a bridge into the gameplay discussion. Two things, one, Chris, you mentioned that the story is there, it's designed to be whether, you want to experience or you don't want to experience it. You can take either route. It doesn't matter. You can still get through the game. I don't remember exactly how you put it, but you said something along those lines. And that's actually one of the aspects of the world design that is consistent across all of these Miyazaki games that I really respect, is that you mentioned that the story is intricately designed. Yes, that was what really made me think. The world is also just intricately, meticulously designed, just so much effort into every nook and cranny and corner of the world. There are whole areas you don't even have to go to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably true the most of all in Bloodborne, in fact, but it's also true in Dark Souls, where there's just these entire areas, or major chunks of an area where they design it, they put bosses there. And they're just like, we're going to put all this effort to design this boss that a lot of people may never even see. And I kind of respect that. And the other side where you've been, saying, hey, yeah, it's true. You don't need to understand the plot for this game, or it's okay if all you have that sets you in motion is a NES manual style telling of, hey, there's a bad guy doing bad things, go forth into the world and beat the game. However, there is one aspect of the story that did cross my mind where not lack of clarity could in some ways be cool and in other ways be frustrating or lead to indecision. And this does impact the gameplay is with the covenants, which covenants, especially for people who had already played Demon Souls, those were like kind of in the pre-release hype. Those were kind of considered like the big new feature, was where you could form a covenant with these different sort of morally gray figures or sects. Sometimes like it is kind of a little unclear, like, oh, this seems interesting, but what are the consequences going to be for this? And sometimes it's unclear, and that's probably intentional, but it can also lead to a lot of hesitation. And maybe, the kind of player who likes to play through the game unspoiled might be missing out on a lot of things that maybe would interest them if they don't look up outside information about like, what's all this about anyway? What would better suit my character build or the things I want to do, or what am I going to miss out on if I do this one instead of this one, so that can be perhaps a little bit of a negative aspect in terms of the story not making much sense, having a little bit of an impact on the gameplay because of that covenant indecision.
I didn't see the covenants actually mattering at all. I didn't see how they impacted gameplay or they impacted storytelling. Some of them gave you items, which were nice, but I didn't see how they mattered. I think you're right.
I mean, do they matter? In my head, they matter, but it wasn't a system that I delved too deeply into. I mean, I know I took some covenants, but I mean, maybe Shane can explain a little more about to what extent they matter.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of what you were getting at, Try, really, is that there are ramifications, like in consequences for choosing certain covenants, but by and large, you could probably play through the entirety of your playthrough and not have any idea why it mattered, because the consequences are very obfuscated in a lot of cases. So it almost, to someone who didn't know any different, it would probably just be, you would just assume that that's how it's supposed to play out. Like you wouldn't know that it was different because you chose, X covenant instead of Y covenant or what have you.
I get a trophy for joining each one.
Yeah. Well, so in my experience, I was going to say, I know, and I don't know these off the top of my head, but I know that there definitely are things that will change in your playthrough for some of those choices. But in my, 3.5-ish playthroughs of Dark Souls now, I've never really, covenants is actually one of the things I've probably never cared much about, like at all. And it's interesting that, because I wasn't, as I said in my personal experience, I wasn't really around for the pre-release and then the initial, release of Dark Souls. So it's interesting to me that was hyped as like this big new feature, because in practice and I could be totally wrong, but I think the three of us here kind of saying the same thing sort of proves the point that I don't think they really actually matter that much. Like if you're really into the multiplayer, specifically like the PvP aspect of Dark Souls, there's a couple of those covenants that really actually do matter for that.
The evil snake guy.
Right. But other than that, it never seemed like it mattered much to me, honestly.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue, though, to get into another large portion here that is going to be quite contentious, I am sure, which is the gameplay. The gameplay, how do we describe this? It is an RPG. I would say it's more of a Western action RPG, where you walk around with a weapon and a shield, It's just basic kind of hack and slash to an extent. The controls are very unorthodox. Like attack is R1 and R2, and your shield are is L1 and L2 or whatever controller you're using.
I mean, that's become common now, though, and I actually don't like it when it shows up in games that aren't Souls-likes.
Yeah, that if you could put this in any like fast-moving action game, I think I would just put it down immediately. That's so. Yeah, I don't want it in any other game, that's for sure. But here, I don't know. We'll talk about it.
It works. It works for me in these games.
Yeah, it takes a while to get used to, though. Definitely does. Shane knows that when I played in front of him and I was screaming at the screen because I wanted to do an attack and I kept using an Estus flask.
Yeah, he'd keep trying to attack and his character would start chugging Estus and he was like, fucking stop.
But it does frustrate me because like I haven't played God of War Ragnarok yet, but the first was 2018, the first God of War reboot, the Norse God of War series. They did that where Kratos' melee attacks are on the shoulder buttons. I'm like, that's not the buttons that makes Kratos attack. And I'm like, I would rather this be on square and triangle, but Atreus's attacks were on square and triangle. I didn't know until I was like halfway through the game that there's a control setting that puts Atreus's attacks on the shoulder buttons and Kratos's on square and triangle. I'm like, but now it's too late. Like I can't, like I wish I'd started the game this way. Like there's still those moments where I hit the wrong button, but I would hit the wrong button way more if I switch at this point.
Yeah.
Now that I know that, I'm totally going to play Ragnarok, assuming it has the same option. I'm totally going to play Ragnarok with that. But yeah, like in Souls games, for some reason, it always made sense for the attacks to be on the shoulder buttons. It was like that in Demon Souls. Always made sense. I don't know why it works in those games for me, but in other games, I wish it wasn't. I like the R3 lock on and then tilt R3 to move between enemies. I hadn't seen that before Demon Souls, and it became very common after the Souls games got going. I love that. I think most games should do enemy lock on like that, but attacking, maybe not so much.
I'll also say one of the things in this game that Shane clued me in on very quickly is your equipment loadout. And in many games, most RPGs for that matter, like there's always been going way back, there's been an element of encumbrance. And in many RPGs, there is an element of encumbrance, but usually you don't see the effects of encumbrance until you're over your allotted weight, based off usually a strength statistic and a lot of RPGs, which is endurance in Dark Souls. And the higher you level up your endurance, the more you can carry. However, what is the percentage? Is it 20 or 25%? If you go over 20% of your equipment load,
I think it's 20.
Right. So then, like, the way that you roll, the way you dodge, the way that Try like to said that he plays, and to an extent I do as well, your roll gets slower the higher percentage of your equipment load is relative to your total equipment load. In most games that I've played anyway, this doesn't matter until you get much higher, and it does severely impact the way you play. So the way I play this game is similar to Try, but I did have a strength build. Strength build meaning you put most of your experience points, which you get from Souls, which you get from killing enemies, and a lot more for bosses or items. I mean, I'm sure we're going to discuss that because the dying aspect. I used battle axes and battle axes. I didn't increase my dex whatsoever, so I wasn't even able to use most swords. I wasn't able to use bows, but I kept would usually keep a heavier shield with high stability, which means that you get hit in your stamina bar, which controls how much you can roll or run or attack. You get less that taken off and use my weapon to attack. But then my clothes, my actual armor, I used really light armor throughout the game just so I could kind of balance it out. And that light armor would have defensive stats, especially resistance stats to a lot of those resistances that the traditional RPG, you can get poisoned, you can get, God forbid, you can get cursed. What's the other one? Bleed. And as long as you could prevent, that armor is very effective in preventing that, but I still could attack and defend like I was a strength character. So learning these systems is a really cool benefit. So I have to ask both of you, I'll start out with Try here. What kind of build do you traditionally do? I know you alluded to it and being very light with spears and shields. What specifically, how do you develop your character?
Yeah, I've tended to, throughout all of these games, go for some magic. Like I say, I like those spears. I like keeping the enemies at a distance. I like holding up my shield while I attack. It's a bit of a coward's way, I'll admit. But Yeah, I like I do like magic attacks. I feel like magic I can't really remember if it's Demon's Souls or Dark Souls that I felt like so strongly favored magic is making it comparatively easy. It might have been a little bit of both.
That definitely happens in Dark Souls. If you
I heard Dark Souls magic is easy mode.
Yeah, if you build out a magic character, it's easy.
Yeah, but I still like to have some I like to like swap out my shield for my, what do they call it, the catalyst, your magic wand or whatever. I like to swap out the shield and have that in one hand and then the weapon in the other. So I like to do both of those. Like I've never really, I've never done anything go for like like a naked naked character or anything. I don't go for like the absolute lightest possible, but I definitely don't equip anything to a point where I really do have that heavy whoomp on the ground as you do your roll. That's definitely no good for me. In terms of like what stats I put stuff into, that kind of stuff is stuff that kind of fades away from my memory after I've done a run of one of these games. And in fact, I kind of like relearn what some of the stats do because it's definitely been different over the course of the series. And I can't remember specifically how it was in Dark Souls 1, but they do obfuscate some things in terms of what does that, what increases this, what increases that, what scales with this, what scales with that. So I kind of learned that information again when I do one of these games. But in general, I've not gone heavy on strength, not gone like 100% all in on magic, but definitely do love magic for sure.
I could not figure out how to use magic for the life of me. There was one character that gets you started in pyromancy, and I put some characters into pyromancy. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be able to cast fire. Then I learned a spell. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be able to do this. And then I quit pyromancy and I kept pressing the attack button. It's like, I'm not doing the thing.
That's a different catalyst or maybe not a catalyst at all. It's a different fire is different. Like, don't you have to use I could be remembered wrong, but I think like if you have something like the magic missile, like the white and blue magic, I think is like a totally different item to equip to cast it compared to fire. Am I right on that, Shane?
I believe so. I'm trying to remember because I know I'm probably conflating some Elden Ring stuff with this.
I do want to say I remember it being like until like Blighttown or something, maybe, where I finally found like a good fire casting tool, whatever those are called. And there's also like or are they like rosaries or something that do like healing magic? Like it's like there's definitely different tools.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you're right. You do have to have a catalyst equipped in order to actually like cast the spells. And it has to be a catalyst that I think like 1-to-1 with the type of magic that you're trying to cast, if I remember correctly. And so like for those sorceries also, you have like a specific number of attunement slots that you can equip different sorceries to. And you have to have a certain amount of like intelligence stat to be able to actually even use those. So yeah, there's definitely like a sort of a different setup to use sorcery / magic in Dark Souls. So the interesting thing about this discussion, and I guess the way that you said that you approach this game, is like the total opposite of me, because I do not like using magic in like any of the Souls games. Like I know I know they're useful.
Oh, you can attack without being right up on enemies.
Yeah, but that's the coward's way. Try.
I mean, especially in like any game where like you're fighting like super large enemies. Like if you can do ranged attacks, I like to be farther back because then you can see the whole enemy and what it's doing, and also be farther away from it where it's safer. I think, hopefully, maybe.
I like his think. I couldn't figure out how to do it, but I like his thinking.
See, this could also just be my experience all the way back in like classic World of Warcraft when my main was a rogue, and so I'm just used to seeing nothing but the like ass end of a boss.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, my MMO experience is like Final Fantasy 11, primarily a healer, so I'm further back.
See,
in Final Fantasy 14, I'm a dancer, which is also a ranged attacker. They have like spinning, like whatever Renoa's weapon is in Final Fantasy 8. Those things.
A dog.
No, that's Quistis.
Oh,
they're like chakrams or whatever. Chakram, is that the word? Yeah. So like, again, like, you know, and I always like, so I can like be way back. I can see what's going on. I can focus on dodging instead of thinking about attacking so much. So, and man, sometimes that magic in Dark Souls, it can really take a good chunk off that boss health. I mean, sometimes even just one attack can like, make a real big difference.
Yeah, see, and I know that like logically, but it's just, I don't know, for whatever reason, and this doesn't apply to all games because there are some games where I really enjoy playing casters, but for some reason in Dark Souls, it just doesn't, that particular style of gameplay just really doesn't like click with me. And so I've always gone with like pure melee builds. Like if I don't have to touch magic, I just don't.
I would love to try it. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to try it, but I always chicken out.
Yeah. Like intelligence, faith, arcane, like those are my dump stats. Like in Dark Souls, like I just don't do anything with those. But yeah, so typically, at least in this game, because I can't say this across the board, and like full disclosure, the reason for that is because when I went into Dark Souls 2 and 3, you know, I did some preparatory research to figure out like what a good enough like build would be to work towards. And so for instance, like Dark Souls 2, one of the better builds to go with generally is actually like a sort of fencer build almost, where it's a little bit more dex based and you're using like a rapier, which is not something that I would have like intrinsically just thought to go with.
See, that would be much more, that would be closer to my style.
Yeah, see, and that worked out really well. So like that's what I went with DS2. But for Dark Souls 1, my go-to is always just two-handing a big ass sword. Like that is my go-to.
So explain to me, like, are you wearing heavy armor with that as well?
Yes.
How do you not get hurt fighting bosses when you can barely move?
Well, that's the thing, though.
Yeah, I would like to know this too.
But that's the thing. Okay, see, that's the thing is like I equip myself in such a way that I get the heaviest armor possible while still being able to mid-roll. So I never go full fat roll because that's like totally unusable, and it sucks. I don't think I've ever built a character that is pure fast roll. Like I don't think I'm ever under like 20% equip load. I don't think that's, to me, I feel like that's not even possible. So no, I go with like the heaviest armor I can find. With Dark Souls 1, I always just go with the Grass Crest shield because you don't even have to have it like,
oh, it's great.
You don't have to have it active. Like you just have it on your back and you get the stamina boost. So that thing's
is that
great.
The one that like it's always recovering your stamina or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The only thing I don't like about it is there's like, isn't there like always like green sparklies around you or something?
There is, but it looks cool.
Yeah.
It's useful.
Yeah.
It's useful.
Yeah. So at any rate, I always go with that. And part of the reason that I like going specifically with the Zweihanda is because it is really easy to get right off the bat if you know where it is. When you first show up in Firelink, really all you have to do is just go, you know, the graveyard area that's like right there. It's like connected to it. You go through the spot where the big raven's hanging out, and you take those stairs down into that graveyard section. And if you make a beeline for one of the bigger tombstones in the back, that two-handed sword is chilling right there on the ground. All you do is pick it up and then just haul ass back to Firelink. And you now have yourself, I use that sword through my entire run of the game, and it works beautifully. And all you need to do is just upgrade it to plus 15. You don't want to go with like any of the like magic imbuements because that screws up the scaling and whatever. You just want to go just normal plus 15, boost that thing up. Even though it sounds like it's a strength build, it's actually not. It's probably closer to what is referred to as a quality build, which is kind of like a balance between strength and dex, but it's actually a little more dex heavy. So usually I'll get enough somewhere around like mid to high 20s in strength which is enough to like, successfully two-hand, or actually you can one-hand the Zweihander with a shield if you want to with that much strength. But I usually just two-hand it, and you get like 40 something dex, and then the rest of it just ends up going into like your vitality and endurance for health and stamina. And then the resistance stat is garbage in Dark Souls, so don't even bother with it. And then, like I said, I don't really do casting, so intelligence and faith are not important for my build, but that's generally where I go. And so I know a lot of what I ended up with is not something that your average player is going to end up with, because I have to dig it out, because this is the character I have like over 100 hours into at this point. But that one it's not Havel's armor, but it's one of the heavier armors, and I can't remember exactly what it is because it's been a minute, but it's one of like the heaviest armors in the game, but I'm still able to wear it with those stats because of the accessories that I have along with it, like Havel's ring, giving you the extra equip load and all that stuff. Like that's crucial.
And the FAP ring.
Yeah. So anyway, like that's generally what I go with. That's my go-to. I was thinking about this leading up to this episode. I actually want to do another run of Dark Souls, but I actually want to do it. No, I won't say blind because that's impossible now, obviously, but I kind of want to go in without doing what I normally do. Like I want to go in and just like try to build something completely different and see how I do. Because at this point I've got like the two-handed sword build down to a science. So I want to try something else.
I think now that we've talked about our builds, I do have to bring up this question. Because I think this is a very important question when it comes to Dark Souls. What is our opinion on the difficulty? Because I don't know if you've heard this, but Dark Souls is known for being difficult. I think that's its reputation. I'm not quite sure, but I think we'll answer this question. I'll start here. It takes a while to get used to it. I think, and there's a lot of caveats I'm about to say. If you go into this game blind and you know no one who has played Dark Souls, and you are not part of a community that has played Dark Souls, you are going to get your ass kicked.
Yep.
A lot for a very long time. And you may quit. Because I damn near cried playing this game. Especially early on when I was learning the controls and what kind of weapon I wanted to weld. And even once I got used to it in the beginning, there are times when I think this game kind of goes overboard a little bit. Then there are times where I'm like, once you learn the mechanics with some of these bosses, it's just like that's it. Like, this is what this game wanted me to do. This is nothing. This doesn't make any sense. And I would say that most bosses are actually pretty easy. And where most of the difficulty comes from is the environments, because I think you're controlling your character on a lot of the platforms is very slippery. I think I probably died more from falling in this game than I did from actual enemy encounters, just because I would always be in a position. I wouldn't even get knocked off. I'd just be running up a ledge. Then all of a sudden there's a little bit of a slip and there I go. And it says you died. I'm like, there goes like my character with 3 humanity, like loaded on it. And that's gone. But in terms of enemy encounters, especially because I was going through this game melee, once you learn to have your shield up and look for opportunities and how to counter properly, or how to do backstabs, or how to parry, which I never learned. Once you learn these things, most encounters throughout the game are very similar. They're very basic and they're fairly easy. Like big enemies, you learn you have to roll from. Smaller enemies, you block and counter. Very easy stuff. And that's kind of the same for a lot of the boss encounters too. It's learning how to outmaneuver them more than blocking their attacks and countering. A couple bosses I think are complete crap. The Bell Gargoyles are total nonsense. That battle is screwy as hell. And the reason I bring this up, and the caveat here is why, if you have no community, you will not know what to do, is because the only reason I knew what to do here is because I went into our Discord and I raged. And I raged for about a good hour. I told everyone I wanted to quit. I owe Dark Souls nothing. I hate this game. I am done with it, because what the Bell Gargoyle boss does, is the second major boss you fight, from what I remember. You get it down to halfway health, and then another one comes in, And then while you're trying to attack one, it's sitting in the fire breath of another one. So if you try to get up there and attack it, you get damaged with fire breath. And then once it's done breathing fire, the other one's swiping at you, so you can't attack because your shield's up. I'm sure if you have bow and arrows and magic, you can do all sorts of fun ranged stuff. Try having fun with the ranged attacks.
Yeah.
Sure, it's fun then.
I mean, you also can theoretically kill the first one before the second one really gets a chance to do much, but
yeah, sure. If you're that good at it, you have a weapon that can do that damage, which I did not. So the only reason I knew what to do is because, like, the community, our community, Dark Souls community, Dark Souls fans, calmed me down. They're like, just summon Solaire.
I mean, yes, that also helps a lot.
Bring him into the battle. Do not be afraid to use your humanity at the bonfire. Bring him into battle, and now you have a companion. He'll probably kill them for you. You'll be fine.
Well, that is something that changes the game a whole lot. Is, you know, I can't remember specifically summoning Solaire, but now I don't know if you used any of the online features, if you ever summoned allies or allowed yourself to be summoned.
I was on PS3, so no.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I was on PS3 as well, but of course, online play was free on PlayStation back in those days.
Yeah.
You know, I had access to, you know, again, I played the game. I had the game day one. I had access to all the other dummies running around in the world trying to figure this out as I was, right? I didn't have to look up like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? This doesn't make sense, because we were all trying to figure it out together. Just that aspect, it doesn't even so much matter if the other humans that you summon, it doesn't so much matter if the other humans you summon know what they're doing or don't know what they're doing. Just the fact that there is another body in the fight to split the boss's attention is a total game changer.
Yep.
That's the thing that has me most scared about Sekiro not having online play, is just the fact that the boss will be focused exclusively on me. On me. That's terrifying. Yeah, that's why I'm always such a chicken and summon people into boss fights, is just to have that other body in the fight. It just makes the bosses sometimes feel a lot less relentless. Also, it helps you learn things. It helps you maybe step back a bit, see what the boss is doing to that guy, step forward, see what works, see what doesn't. And that's why my strategy through, literally all of these games that I've played through has been, okay, I got to the boss door. I'm successful at getting to the boss door, but I'm dead. So I'll put up my sign, let someone summon me. I beat the boss. I'm like, that's intriguing. I sort of get that, but I'm not confident enough to use my humanity and revive myself yet. You know, I'll grind through that boss a few more times, helping other people, getting lots of souls while I do it, level up a bit. And I'm like, all right. I think now's the time. I'm going to use my humanity. Then when I'm human, I can summon other players who lay down their signs. And I'll summon at least one or two. And, if it doesn't look like anyone else is around, then, I'll just go for it. Oh, it's great. It's great.
That sounds great.
Oh, it's great. It's so good. You would love it. It's great.
I hate the fact I didn't even have that option.
Most Souls, I think like I shouldn't say most Souls players, but like the get good Souls players, they're the ones that you see mostly talking about playing these games online. I don't think they care about that online aspect. I don't think they care so much about the cooperative aspect. But for me, oh my gosh, it is a wonderful thing. And I'm not like a multiplayer gamer at all. Like I like to play like local retro style co-op at home. I'll once in a blue moon play an online co-op game with a buddy. But like the idea of like playing with randos online is like not very appealing.
Yeah.
At least in like the Final Fantasy games that I play online, like 14, like at least it's all just like chatting with in text, right? Like there's no voice in that game, which is good. I don't want to talk to these people. And like the style of multiplayer, the gameplay that these games have is like so perfect for me, because it lets me have the benefit of cooperating with other players without having to communicate with them in any way. And that's wonderful.
All right, now see, I'm about to blow both y'all's minds, because I purposefully turn off the online features when I play Dark Souls games.
Oh, now see, I don't. Do you even get to see like the messages on the ground?
No,
you don't.
No.
Yeah,
no.
see, that stuff is like that's also part of the experience. I mean, you're saying like how do you figure this out? People do put down these notes that like will say, you know, things like left, right. And, you know, sometimes you don't know what that means. Like, does that mean there's going to be an enemy to the left, or, oh, there's a treasure chest to the left?
Treasure ahead. Invisible wall.
I say there's equal amounts of trolling that happens too, where it's just like, treasure ahead, and it's a pit.
Which is all part of the fun, I think. Like, you know,
okay, so
there's that seed of doubt about the message, but it's also like probably like 60 to 70% helpful.
Yeah. Well, see,
they have a rating. They have a rating.
That is true,
yeah. But
yeah.
that's I think all that is part of the experience. But I'm also glad that it's possible to play the game without it. But, you know, Chris, it's very possible that I could have walked away from the game with some of the frustrations that you have if I hadn't had that opportunity.
I fully agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the cooperative aspect of it is great. Actually, the reason I always play offline for any Dark Souls game is because I absolutely loathe the invasion system. I think it is the worst. The reason for that is, in my mind, the game itself is already enough of a challenge that I don't need some random jackhole to just like come into my game and just totally screw everything up.
Oh yeah. It's like a 1 in 5 chance I am going to succeed after I've gotten invaded, because
exactly.
Like, especially because the people who want to do invasion are the best of the best.
Yes, exactly. And so like, to me, that's not intriguing. Like, I know for some folks, like that's like emergent gameplay, you know, it's like, oh, well, you know, it adds to the experience of like, not only is the game world itself dangerous, but who knows, maybe someone else will show up in your world. And then now it's a whole new challenge. And I'm like, cool. If that appeals to you, I don't begrudge you that. That's fantastic. And I'm glad that you enjoy that. To me, that sounds atrocious. Like, I don't want some other rando showing up and ruining the last like hour of work I put in to work through Sen's Fortress or whatever the fuck. That would be a reason for me to put the game down, honestly. Like, if I'm being totally honest.
I understand some I relate, I would say, to a lot of your reasons there, but at the same time, I feel like it doesn't happen that often in my experience. It certainly rarely happened at like the most critical moments either. Like, I can't think of a specific instance where I felt like really set back.
Yeah.
And like I said, kind of at the beginning, you know, one of my favorite things about the difficulty of the Souls games is it gives you this incentive. You know, it's very similar to like an NES game like Castlevania or something, with the difference being it's got this mechanic of, well, you lost everything, but you can get it back. You can get it back. And it's like nothing ever happened as long as you do at least as well as you did the last time. And chances are, like, if someone invades you, you're not like beyond where you've ever gotten before, right? Like, or you could position yourself to then wait for them at a point where you know it would be relatively easy for you to get back to. So it's never occurred for me that I can ever recall in a particularly ruinous fashion.
I didn't even want the possibility. That's really what it was. I was just like, nope, I don't. That does not appeal to me whatsoever.
But the other aspects of the online are so good.
Well, and that's the thing, is like, I feel like
it's worth it in the PvP is a minor diversion and annoyance.
Yeah, and that's fair.
The other benefits are to me are huge.
Reminds me a lot of Ultima Online. Kind of the same mindset.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess for me it was never that big of a deal, because like there was always, and especially in the later games, but even in Dark Souls itself, there were plenty of opportunities to summon NPCs to assist you in a lot of the boss fights that I never really felt like I was in need or want of like additional assistance, and that's not.
And see, that's something I didn't even know much about, because you're like, oh, just summon Solaire. I'm like, I probably did that at some point, but it's like not something I really thought about because I could always use actual humans.
Right. Yeah. And then that's totally valid. But yeah, I don't know. Like I always felt like that was enough. And to you made a good point, Try, which is like even just having another just warm body basically in the room is all that really can make or break a fight.
Yeah.
So that Bell Gargoyles, I found that interesting actually, that was like your big sticking point, Chris, because I've never really had that big of an issue with that particular fight. But that was, then I thought about it and I was like, oh, well, I've always gone into that fight with Solaire. Like that's always helped.
And to be fair, it's the first like major boss battle. Like I kind of think of that as like kind of in a way the first real boss. I mean, it's not, but it kind of is.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's like after that point, I feel like the game opens up quite a bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, a lot.
And really that's also another aspect I like about the gameplay in general is the openness of it, the choices you have as to, you know, where you go here and there and next. I mean, even though the game does have a lot of like literal gates, like the fog gates. Are they fog gates or am I thinking of Demon Souls?
No, they are.
No, there's fog gates.
I couldn't remember if they were fog or if they were light. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's got literal gates that hamper your progress in places. But I love the idea of gameplay that is gated not so much by events and is gated by skill or gated by just the sheer difficulty of the enemies that you could overcome either by skill or by leveling up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the biggest fan of the original Dragon Quest, but I respect the idea of how that world is constructed because you can go anywhere pretty much. You're going to have a whole lot of trouble if you go some places, but you can, you know, you can basically, in theory, finish the game right away. Like there's not much like stopping you from going and getting the main key items that you need to fight the Dragon Lord. And just like you were telling your story with the Zweihander, you know, going, you know, doing that mad dash, the fact that the game leaves open those possibilities that if you could get something really cool, if you go through a really dangerous area, I really respect that. You know, most games would be, you know, very cautious about, you know, like, oh, we can't let the player go somewhere where they might get frustrated or where they might fail too easily or where they're not ready yet. You know, or they haven't seen the story sequence that would make sense for them to go there. No, they just let you go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of literal gates, but it is also more open to, it's less likely to prevent you from going some pretty dangerous places than probably most games, you know, before you should.
Yeah. And I think that's actually is very similar to what I was talking about as far as the storytelling as well, in that the world makes sense. Like the world is built in a way that it's like, yeah, there are some areas that are way more dangerous than others. There's no artificial hand holding going on here. Like if you wander off into this section of the world that if in the example of like that sword in the graveyard is quite literally just naturally a part of the very first place you end up, it's very easy to wander into that spot and you will get slapped down by a skeleton and then be like, oh, I naturally learned I probably shouldn't go there yet, you know, and nobody told you that. There was no sign being like, this is a level 20 zone. Like it just, it just happened. So real quick, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent because I know this is already going to be like a 3-hour episode, but like this reminded me of something that I absolutely adored about the original World of Warcraft. And I've told this story, I think before, probably on the show, might have probably even been in the World of Warcraft episode. But the fact that when I started a brand new character, my very first character was, as I said, it was an undead rogue. So I was on the horde, and the not first, but second area that you get to leveling as an undead character, nobody tells you this. There's no NPC that warns you, nothing, but you can very easily, in just naturally exploring the world, wander off as like a level I want to say 8 or 10, maybe, if I recall correctly, character into the Plague Lands, which was directly connected to the first like zone for the undead, which was like a level 50 plus zone at a time when the game's level cap was 60. And there's nothing stopping you. You could just wander off.
I love that.
And that happened where I was just like, and at the time, like I was just amazed by this world because it was the first MMO I ever played. I'd never played a game like it before. I was fucking mesmerized. And like, so I'm just wandering around. I'm not even doing quests. I'm just looking at shit. And like, I wander into this zone and immediately get murked by a zombie bear. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's how we're playing. And it's one of those experiences that's just like, it's a natural consequences. The game respects you as a player enough to be like, no, we're not going to handhold you. Like, yeah, you could wander out here and take a look if you want. You're probably going to die, but then you'll learn that, hey, you probably shouldn't go there right now. And like you said, I think there's not really a better way to put it. Like, I really respect that as a design decision, because in turn, I feel like as a player, my intelligence is respected by the game, that they're allowing you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I probably shouldn't go on my own tangent as well, but I mean, you know, I had the exact same MMO experience where, you know, Final Fantasy 11, part of the joy I got out of the game was going places that I had absolutely no right going.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was nothing around there that a character my level could do. There was nothing around there a character my level could kill, but like, I just wanted to see what was out there. I just wanted to see it, you know? And for the most part, it lets you go anywhere you want. Whereas Final Fantasy 14 is like very much the total opposite. Like, once you get to the expansions, you literally can't go into any of the areas until you have completed the story in the previous area, or for the previous story. So, you know, that's very much hard story gates. And I prefer the kind of design that's just like Dark Souls. I mean, not completely like Dark Souls, because it does have gates, but it still has a lot of openness to it and lets you go, quote unquote, the wrong way for a long time if you so desire. And I think that serves an important sort of motivator of like, you can see something very difficult early in the game and you kind of look forward to reaching a point where you can go back and overcome that challenge. And it always, in a game that is so unguided, I think that's also very useful to prevent the player from feeling like, gosh, I don't know what to do now.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? Where am I supposed to go? Because there is not like really a singular, where am I supposed to go? Like, you've no doubt come across lots of things that you bypassed because, you know, it was the other way, or it was too far away, or it was too difficult, or you just didn't understand how to get through somewhere at some point. So there's like always something in the back of your mind of like, I should investigate that. Like, if you don't know exactly where to go next, there's enough directions you can go to sort of poke at the seams of the world to see like, what can I make happen? And then sometimes it could like lead off onto like a completely unexpected adventure in another area that wasn't like what you thought you were going to be doing at all. It's just a beautiful example of what game design can be and how not every game has to have, you know, the compass on the top of the screen and the waypoints and all that stuff. Like, you know, I sometimes when it's in games, that stuff can be nice, but I prefer a game that pulls off not telling you where to go and still you manage to find your way.
Yeah. And I mean, the beautiful thing about it too is that at the end of the day, like, there still is sort of an intended path, right, to go through this game.
Yeah.
But it's not ever like explicitly stated. It's just, it's done in such a way that the game is designed such that it will sort of naturally push you along that path, but it never tells you like, hey, these are your guardrails.
Yeah, the game does flow quite well. And we mentioned this much earlier on. Try mentioned it about how interconnected the game is and how everything does really flow together and does really give you that feeling of a Metroidvania in 3D, because you see these gates, you get these keys open up doors, you can go in there you couldn't go there before. Does it necessarily mean you should go there? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're missing an item.
Or maybe you start the game with the master key and then you open a door and you find Havel and he shit stomps you.
Yeah,
that might
completely crashes.
Maybe that's not a specific example that happened to somebody specifically.
Definitely happened to me. Ran into Havel like first thing in the game.
Yep.
I ended up getting him later. He got
That's
his.
good.
I do have some criticisms about that, as much as I do like the fact that the world's interconnected. And I'll be fully upfront here. I used a guide, mostly because, again, I did hear this game was difficult. I don't know if you guys have, but and it was quite long. So I wanted to get through this game with, minimal resistance. But with that being said, there are a couple instances that I do want to mention where this game, yes, it's very interconnected, and these are, it's a great thing to have, and a lot of these environments are fun to traverse, fun to explore, and just looking at every nook and cranny. This is always a great thing. But the way that the game presents itself in such a way that there are areas that you go to that require items that I don't think the game naturally points you in the direction of. So in Blighttown, there's a giant pit full of sludge that you can traverse fairly easily if you have an item called the Rusted Ring. Where do you find the Rusted Ring? In the Undead Asylum, where you started the game. Well, how do you get back to the Undead Asylum? Oh, you just have the bird take you. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have to run up the stairs, roll on a skinny platform, just kind of land there, then run up that platform, go up another set of stairs, and then go into the nest and curl into a ball, and you'll be taken to the Undead Asylum. What tells you that? Nothing. How do you know that there's a Rusted Ring there? You don't. You just find it.
But
you could say that's part of the fun of exploring, but the method and how you can get to that location with the specificity in order to do so is so obscure that in my imagination, there is no way you could naturally come to that conclusion.
Yeah, and it's not it's not the game doesn't spell anything out, so it wouldn't spell that out either. But I'm pretty sure most people, their first time, at least if they didn't read anything or if it was right when the game came out, Blighttown is infamous for a lot of reasons. You play it on PS3, so you saw the same performance we all saw back in the day in Blighttown.
Yeah, how was that frame rate, by the way?
Yeah.
It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but
maybe it was patched to be a little bit better than when I played on PS3 back in the day. But I'm pretty sure I just brute forced my way through Blighttown. It wasn't, it wasn't great, but it can be done. And I also respect a game that lets you force your way through something that is so ridiculous. And it's like, this doesn't feel like what the game wants me to do. And yet I am able to do it. And so
sure,
I get some joy out of those kinds of moments too.
Well, there's two more instances that I do want to bring up. I think that's the least egregious, because at the end of the day, you can traverse these. You can use your Estus flasks. You have items to get rid of the poison. Like, they can be mitigated to an extent. Number two, the second, it's more egregious, but not the most egregious, is my number one, is when you go down to the Londo Ruins and you meet ghosts, and you have to use transient curses or a cursed weapon or a weapon that ghosts drop in order to kill the ghosts. How do you know that you have to use a transient curse in order to harm the ghost? You don't. You pick one up in a item that you break if you break it. You see a corpse in there and you can break it, and it's like, oh, there's an item that transient curse. What can you do?
Does the item description explain anything about that?
It does, but that's the thing. Like, you don't naturally run into these items again because the game doesn't tell you anything. So that's why it's like not as egregious as Blighttown, because eventually you're going to figure it out if you go through your items, right? It's possible.
Even though that's like actually one of the first areas you can go to, technically, for me at least, it ended up being a relatively late game area.
Yes, same.
So yeah, and I can't remember can you damage them with magic if you don't?
That I don't know.
If you don't have that, I don't remember for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But yeah, that was again an example of like an area that you go to early in the game. It's like super long elevator ride down, and then you ultimately end up approaching it. Well, can you approach it from a different way? I'm trying to remember now.
I think I got there a different
way. But like that's another one of those things.
There is a different way.
Where it's just like the world's designed such a way of where like, it's like, oh, wow, I saw this so long ago. I didn't expect to be approaching it from this other way. Like it feels like you're so far away, and then you find out how it's actually connected, and it's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. And that's how I got into Blighttown, by the way. I didn't use the door. I went through Drake's Valley, through New Londo Ruins.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm pretty sure. Oh, wow. That was the first time you got there was through that door?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild. Okay.
Isn't that like next
Master
to
Key.
the like the water mills?
It is.
Spinning?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember that being my exit from Black Town.
Yeah, exactly. That was my exit.
That's my entrance. So
that's crazy. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that might have, I can't decide whether that would have made things more or less difficult for you.
I would say more, because that leads you like directly into the thick of like everything.
Yeah, but yeah, like right into Quaeleg's ruins and like Quaeleg's lair. But then the most egregious, this is the most egregious because I went through this and this was hell, is right after you fight the centipede demon, you're supposed to get an item called the charred ring, orange charred ring, which allows you to walk on lava and take minimal damage because you go into this giant lava pit. I did not get the orange charred ring. That did not fall for me. I finished that boss with no ring. So the very next area, you are expected to go through this with the expectation that you have the orange charred ring because the magma does hurt. Now, there are ways to circumvent this. You can put on the gold brimmed outfit that you get from fighting a previous boss, which is kind of a clue. You have another ring that reduces fire damage, but you have to roll from one certain point to another certain point and know where these points are. And you can't run, because I tried running, unless your VIT's probably really high. My VIT was I think I stopped leveling up my VIT at 30. So you have to run to the other side and hope you don't die. And then as soon as you get to the other side, you need to use an Estus flask because you're going to be going to another location and then running or rolling to the next area. And so when I didn't get the charred ring, I had to look up, like, how do I make it through this area called Lost Islith without this ring? Because this area is clearly designed for me to have it. And if I didn't have a guide and I wasn't told what to do, this would have been a hard brick wall for me. Like that, there would almost be no way to make it through.
That's definitely like, I can't remember specifically what my experience was like there, but that's definitely kind of that's a bit out of step with the design of the rest of the game, where it's like, okay, here is what you are quote unquote supposed to do. Like you're supposed to be able to find your own way through almost any situation, and you can with or without, but
yeah,
having such an obvious, like, this is what you're supposed to do is not really what these games usually do. So I kind of agree with you. And I do remember like those later areas like Lost Islith, like that's where all the T-Rexes were, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if as I saw it, I was not going near it because there's nothing I could do.
Those parts of the game, like, visually don't fit into my memory as well as the others. And maybe that's partially just because they just weren't as interesting or appealing to me. Like, I do think some of those later game areas like that didn't make as strong of an impression as the rest of the world.
Well, there's a reason for that too. And that's just because, like, not that any of what I'm about to say is an excuse, because it's not, but like the back like third of Dark Souls is frankly unfinished. And that they've gone on record about that they were kind of rushed with the development of the final areas. Like Lost Islith is a perfect example where
it feels like it.
It does. And that's why, is because there was a lot more that they wanted to do with those final third-ish areas of the game, and they just didn't have the time. And so they kind of just did like what they could with what they had. And it's one of the things I know that, like, you know, that they've kind of gone on record as having some serious regrets about, because they had a much grander vision for sort of like capping the game off. And the fact that a lot of the final areas that you see in the game are frankly kind of letdowns comparatively to what you've seen up until that point is a huge bummer. And Lost Islith is actually probably one of the biggest offenders in terms of that, and like that sort of completely disparate like game design. That's kind of what you're saying. Try. So yeah, no, those, I mean, and that's a very sort of fancy / dancing around the point way of saying like honestly, those areas suck. They're not great.
I like the Crystal Caves, by the way.
Isn't that the area where at the end of it there's like the isn't she like a lady in a tree or something? That's the boss.
Oh yeah, the best boss. Yeah,
I remember. I want to say like one time, like I just like jumped into the middle and like instantly killed her or something. Does that sound like a thing?
What boss is this?
Bed of Chaos.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and then I remember like lucking into it being super easy the first time, and then the second time I played the game, again, not a new game plus because I never did a new game plus, but I just new character.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting there and I'm like, this was not my experience the first time, and this is bad. I just got lucky.
Yeah, no, that's probably I'm trying to think. That's probably the worst boss I think in the whole game. It's just badly designed, and again it leads back to the fact that they just didn't do what they wanted to with anything in those areas, and that's included like the fact that the whole boss encounter is sliding down into this pit where you're literally fighting a tree, but then also the floor is falling out underneath you, but also you have to know that the only way to actually beat the tree is to purposefully fall, but in a specific spot where you can then...
I just lucked into that my first time.
Yeah, that's crazy that you lucked into that, by the way. That like you have to fall onto this route and then run along this route without getting batted off by a tree branch, and then like go into the center of the tree and just one hit kill this friggin' bug. Like it's bad. It's a bad encounter.
And it doesn't respawn, which is the most unique boss in the entire game. That you can just hit one part and then you can quit out of the game, come back, and that part's dead, and you just go to the next part, quit out of it, then come back.
Oh, I actually didn't even know
and
that.
Just go for the middle. Yeah.
Interesting.
Like, it's 3 parts.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah, if you kill one of those parts, if you die, that part's still dead if you come back.
It's like the end of Ninja Gaiden on NES, where even though it sets you really far back if you die while fighting one of the final boss forms, but the forms you beat stay dead. So I always tell people when they're discouraged about Ninja Gaiden and it's really brutal, like how far back it sends you. I'm like, but you don't have to do all 3 forms of the boss in one go. It's okay.
I will say that the bosses after Nito get less and less interesting. Unless you fight the 4 kings before Nito, because the 4 kings is kind of a lame boss fight too, because I was told before I went in there it's a DPS check, and I'm like, okay, well I have my raw axe +5 or whatever, I'm going to be fine because I'm like slaughtering everything else, and I was not fine. And then as soon as I went in there with my great axe +15, all of a sudden that boss became a cakewalk. It just walked up and just started slamming it.
I was about to say, I'm like, you rolling into 4 kings with a +5, my guy? Like, what is happening?
It was a raw axe. It was the highest it could go. I thought it was good. I thought it was great. It was not a good time.
Okay,
I remember 4 Kings being, a later game thing, but I'm having a hard time visualizing what was the final boss of Dark Souls, because I'm thinking of like the final boss of Demon Souls, which is like a total gimme, like, and it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And like that's the most, even though there's like nothing to that fight, that's like the Souls boss, this final Souls boss that's like most vivid in my mind. Dark Souls, I'm drawing a blank. I know I'll remember it when you tell me.
It's a humanoid, actually. It's not that much. It's Gwyn, and he's not that much harder than a regular humanoid encounter.
Okay, yeah,
he's just learning the patterns. He's more powerful, obviously.
He hits like a truck.
He can be parried,
but like, yeah,
he hits like a truck, but he could be parried.
Yeah. Well, I'm bad at that, so we know how that went. But yeah.
But like I went into that boss with the heavy shield. I went into the shield of Altorius. I went with my great axe, and like he would hit, and I would take like a sliver of damage because it has high fire resistance because his sword has fire. And then once you learn his pattern, as soon as he's done attacking, I attacked with my great axe, took a huge chunk off, let my shield recover for stamina, and it just became like fighting any other normal like humanoid character. So like I wouldn't call that a disappointment, because I think you make a good point. Like the final boss is almost like, hey, here's a reward for making it all the way here. You've suffered enough, and like at this point, you know, you're here. But like a lot of those bosses, like Four Kings was just smacking it. Nito, I mean, other than the skeletons running around that are a headache, and of course you can kill them with the divine weapon, which they don't really allude to, because even when you go down to the catacombs, you don't need to have it as long as you're killing the necromancer, so they don't revive. But if you do have a divine weapon, it makes it a lot easier, whatever the case might be. But Nito is also another one where it's kind of DPS too. You go in there and, you know, if your weapon's strong enough, Nito's going to fall before you do. And you get a lot of that. Like Pinwheel, I don't even know why that's a boss. And like 2 screens later, Pinwheel is
a regular
just
enemy.
an encounter. Yeah. So there's a lot of weird boss fights. Like the way they design it in the beginning with the Taurus demon, and how that is so well crafted. Even though I got pissed and like Shane's like, oh, do this. And now the more I think about it, like, oh, you run down this corridor, you're getting shot by arrows. So that makes you go back and then climb up there, and you realize, oh, I have a ledge. I was just taught earlier there's a ledge I can do jumps off of. And then you lure the boss back. It's very well crafted. The Bell Gargoyles, as much as I hate it, that's a boss fight where it's teaching you it's okay to summon somebody in order to have a fight. It's like, because the enemy is summoning somebody to help them fight, you should be able to summon somebody to help you fight as well. So it's teaching you these things and teaching you how you can overcome these obstacles without directly telling you. Same with the Capra demon. And it's like, learn your environments, learn how to manipulate it. But there's so many different ways you can do this if you've crafted your character in a specific direction, because now you've had time to put points into the different skill levels, and you've had different enough armor sets to know how you want to play. And there are different ways that you can get around the Capra demon, as long as you get around those stupid dogs.
I would say I still hate that encounter to this day, because I think that arena, such as it is such a closet that I hate it.
But it's designed well that you can do things.
Right. Yeah.
That thing freaked me out the first time because it's so fast.
But those things change. And the really first big one you see is like the Iron Golem, where you can just walk up and just hack its leg off.
Yeah.
And it can fall off the cliff. And that's like, that's kind of a lame boss fight. Sif is kind of a lame boss fight. The butterfly is kind of a cool boss fight, but it's also not, because it just moves so slow. If you don't have ranged attacks, you're going to be doing a lot of standing around. There's not much you can do.
I'm wrecking it with magic.
But if you don't have magic, if you have magic, that's a great fight.
At the same time, though, like I agree with your points, but I also feel like, not that I'm necessarily like defending like unpolished aspects of the game, but I do feel like that unevenness is part of what gives the game character. You know, how you're saying like, oh, here's this like super easy thing. Why was this even a boss fight? And yet, like, sort of some of that weirdness is like, I don't know, it's just all part of the experience. It's all part of what feels like you are in this world that is not necessarily gated by, you know, video game events. This is just, here is this world, and just like any world, there's going to be some easy enemies here and some tough enemies there, and it's not like enemies are always going to be linearly more difficult from where you just came from, right? So that's all part of what gives this world this tangible, real, lived-in feel, I think. Again, not necessarily defending, you know, maybe some of the less well-designed aspects, but I don't know.
I will agree with that to a point, but I will also definitely say that even that explanation doesn't cover some of the later parts of the game. Yeah, and
obviously it's not intentional, but it's just all part of some. It adds up to being just something very unique.
Oh, for sure.
As a whole, and I think that adds to its character for better or worse.
Yeah. Best boss fight, by the way, is Ornstein Smo, or Alstein Smo. I love that boss fight.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult and frustrating. But I think that if you're looking for a battle that's a capstone in terms of kind of showcasing everything that you've learned, and in terms of bringing everything together to show that you know the mechanics, like the mega boss fight in any Final Fantasy, like You have learned the systems of this game. How well can you do? That is a showcase, and it's a mandatory boss fight in order to really open up the later parts of the game. That is easily, in my opinion, the best boss fight in this game, as difficult and as frustrating as it is.
Yeah, I remember that being pretty difficult when it gets to the second phase of the fight.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, to your earlier point about kind of like how the game does a pretty good job of sort of like showing and not telling, it was amusing to me because like after you had come over and started playing the game and I witnessed your struggles and eventual triumph with the Taurus demon, I went back and I fired up a new character and I did my usual grab the two-handed sword, do my thing, and I got myself back to the Taurus demon. And the interesting difference there is that like once you know, or even like if you are kind of tuned in with what the game is sort of like pushing you towards, it can be made a lot easier. And part of that is the pine resin that they give you in the chest, like almost right before you get to the Taurus demon. Using that, I putting a pine resin on that two-handed sword, I 3-shot the Taurus demon.
Wow.
And I was just like, that was really easy. And like, so that's possible, you know, and that's the thing is like the differences in how, you know, people approach the game, I think is really like fascinating. And the fact that they do kind of give you these sort of breadcrumbs of like, hey, we just gave you this thing and you probably don't necessarily know what it is, but like if you read the description, it tells you like, oh, you know, imbue your weapon with lightning and blah, blah. And if you think to try that out, you'll notice that like you're doing way more damage to this boss. And so that helps with that. And so that it reminded me of that when you were talking about that, because it was just such a like stark contrast between watching you just being like, how am I supposed to do this? To like grabbing that pine resin and just being like thwack, thwack, thwack. Okay, done.
I mean, and hey, at the end of the day, it is an RPG. Any challenge can be overcome with levels and grinding.
With enough grinding.
If need be, you know, I mean, the bosses and enemies are set health, at least until New Game Plus. You know, they aren't going to scale with you. So at the end of the day, any challenge can ultimately be made significantly easier with, you know, just putting in the time.
Brute force, baby. When all else fails.
That's what Lyle says every year during the 4-job fiesta. Shout out to patron Lyle.
I think, and I know we've been on this for a long time, so unless there was something else, I want to kind of cap off this gameplay discussion.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sort of bringing it back a little bit to all of the praise that I gave to the story. For the same reasons, I'm going to not necessarily like shit on, but they're going to be detractors when we're talking about gameplay. And that is the purposeful obfuscation of things. So while I really enjoy it from a plot perspective, and that's actually a big part of what hooked me into this game, the purposeful obfuscation of how the game mechanics themselves work is frustrating as hell. And I actually generally dislike that. And they've been better about that in later entries, where it's still not necessarily just like giving you like the literal math of how something works, but they're a bit more, you know, clear on like this stat is going to do this for you or what have you. Dark Souls is very much like not that. And there are a lot of mechanics that they almost just downright do not explain, that you would need to completely figure out by trial and error unless you were going to go and like look something up. And so that's sort of like both ends of the spectrum on that one. Cause like I said, while I appreciate that sort of like opacity, I guess, in the storytelling, I very much disliked it in the gameplay aspect of things, because to a certain degree, I almost felt like it was unnecessary. Like it was just like this extra step to figuring out like how to be effective at the game at all. I don't know. How did you guys feel about that? Does that make sense? Like where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I mean, I can literally check right now if I step away from my microphone for a bit. Did this game come with an instruction manual? I don't remember. I'm pretty sure Demon Souls did, but Dark Souls, I don't know. I'm going to go find out.
It was released right around that line. And while Try is up, I'll give my opinion here. We can catch him up real quick. But I think one of the biggest barriers to that, in my opinion, is that the user interface is hot trash. So if you want an explanation and you go into the stats, because it says, hey, so you press select, it explains, and it does. But it's so cumbersome to figure out anything. It's cumbersome to go through your item menu. It's cumbersome to go through your stat menu. And you have all these stats, and yes, you can look them up, but doing so is such a pain in the ass because the way the buttons mesh together and how you navigate your menus is awful. It was awful for 2011 standards. Right. This is like you're going through something in the 16-bit era of RPGs, except that you have unlimited inventory, of course. But other than that, like, yeah, it's just antiquated and just very clumsily designed user interface when it comes to those aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to be specific that when I'm talking about game mechanics, I don't mean like, oh, you need to use shoulder buttons or whatever. Like I literally mean it's like scaling, for example. That's a great example, right? Of like weapon scaling. And again, maybe I know Try's like looking in the instruction manuals right now, but like I didn't have an instruction manual because I played this game digitally. So to me, it was just like, I don't know, this weapon says it's got a C grade in dexterity. What the hell does that mean? Like I can intuit kind of what that means, but I don't know. And the other part of it is like, and this is one of the frustrating things that fortunately I'm actually really glad that Elden Ring did this. And that is the ability to adjust your character's stats to basically respec, because in Dark Souls, you really can't do that. And so like if you start building your character a certain way and then you come across a weapon that's like, oh, well, this requires, X amount of strength to use, or, this actually scales really, really well with Dex. And you're like, well, I guess I'm never going to try that because I've already built my character this way and it's not conducive to that whatsoever. Like there's no room for experimentation there. Right. So there's like a lot of stuff you're going to come across. It's like, well, that looks real cool, but I guess it's going to sit in my fucking storage box at my bonfire because like I can't ever use it.
Oh, yeah.
And so and honestly, I know for a fact that's one of the reasons that my first full playthrough of Dark Souls was as enjoyable overall, I think, as it was, is because I went into it with a lot of foreknowledge, because I went and did research beforehand. So I was like, all right, I know that I want to do this build and I want to try to find this armor. And so I know that I need to get X amount of strength in order to use this later and that kind of a thing. But if you don't know that, then it's like a totally different experience. And honestly, that's kind of like how my first playthrough went, where I was just like basically just throwing stats willy-nilly as I found things, where I was just like, oh, well, I just found this shield and I kind of think I want to use that, but it's going to require like 15 more strength for me to even use it. So I guess that's my new goal. And all that ends up happening is you just get this like totally middle of the road character with stats all over the place that probably isn't particularly good at anything,
It's a monster.
I don't know. What'd you find, Try?
So there is a manual in Dark Souls, but it's mostly a pretty useless manual. It's like how to start the game, and then it's only a few pages. But the Demon Souls manual, I've been looking it over. The Demon Souls manual is actually pretty useful overall, I would say. It explains a lot of, like, it doesn't really like talk a lot that, as far as I can see, about saying like, oh, this type of weapon or ability scales with this skill. But at the same time, well, it does say like magic affects spell strength, faith affects miracle memory, miracle strength, and magic defense. A lot of things like is probably, the information is probably in the game, but it explains it in a lot plainer language.
Yeah.
The information is also always there if you want to grab it. Like, for example, like you were talking, Chris, about how you were very confused about magic and Dark Souls. Well, here in the Demon Souls manual, it says, as you progress through the game, you can learn spells and miracles. You need at least 10 magic and intelligence points to use spells, 10 faith points to learn miracles. Spells can be learned from this NPC, and miracles can be learned from this NPC, and they'll indicate how many souls are needed. And it also tells you some spells or miracles may require a particular demon soul. Like, in other words, like the big souls that you get from bosses. Like, it warns you about that in the manual. Like, hey, you might need this to acquire, a certain really cool spell or weapon or something that you might not want to just eat that soul. In other words, right? Like, right. I remember being very confused about that stuff. And I remember like I was on a Skype call with a friend, like back when we were playing Demon Souls, even though you're not like supposed to be playing with friends, like there's still ways to game the system of like putting your sign down at a certain place and you end up playing with your friends. And I remember like just going down the list with him. I'm like, do I want this boss soul? And he's like, no, eat that one. Eat that one unless you want like this really good spell. So like, again, that is information that's like, it is difficult to get that information, but yeah. But anyway, point is Demon Souls did prepare me for the mindset I would need to be in to get into Dark Souls. And Demon Souls had a manual, so all part of those processes sort of eased me into it. And Demon Souls is a much more, you do have, like I said before, you have options of what levels you go to, but it is in general more linear. I mean, I'm under the impression, Shane, as big as you've been into these games, I was under the impression you have not played Demon Souls. Is that right?
I have not. No, it's like one of the few I haven't.
I would be interested in what you would think of it. I loved the remake. It was definitely a game that I was like, the Dark Souls games are just so much bigger. I don't know why would you remake Demon Souls, but I really appreciated revisiting it. I kind of appreciate its somewhat smaller scope.
It's got to get off the Sony exclusivity, and then I'm pretty sure Shane would be on board with that.
I'm trying not to buy a PS5 if I can help it.
I think I might get to PC at some point.
Yeah, it's weird.
They've been starting to do that.
They've been so into putting out PC releases, and that one for some reason they still haven't done. But anyway,
yeah, it seems like a perfect fit. Yeah, I think this is a good time to shift on over to this game's presentation. We're starting with the graphics and how this game looks. Hey Shane, how about you kick this one off?
Dude, I love the way this game looks. Okay, so I know there's a part of me that has always been into this sort of like very gritty, sort of dark fantasy sort of aesthetic. I've never been huge into high fantasy settings. I like them, but it's never been like my thing. But Dark Souls hits that just perfectly. That like low fantasy, like I said, there's really no other way to describe it, but just that sort of like dark aesthetic and like the bleakness of the world. But like, it's interesting. And I know this sounds very like highfalutin, whatever, but like there's this like sort of strange, serene kind of beauty in how bleak the world is. And I know it's a very like, I don't know, like the Cure kind of take on things, but like it is like, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about it. And the funny thing is like there are certain times in the game where it is genuinely beautiful, and you have these moments that are almost like not even, I wouldn't even necessarily say like a break from the rest of the atmosphere, but it's just incorporated in it. That's in such a way that it just feels very natural. Like the obvious example, right, is like when you meet Solaire for the first time. You've kind of been, you've been outdoors, but everything has felt kind of very closed in almost. And you've been traversing, like the undead burg and what have you. And then after you defeat the Taurus demon, you sort of like emerge out onto this bridge area. And after you probably get scorched by a drake, you turn around and you walk down onto this platform and you see Solaire there, and you kind of like want to look up to where he's looking. And that is a genuinely like beautiful moment. You get these like really great sun rays, and it's fantastic. And so I think like, even if you're not playing the remaster, although I'll say the remaster looks fantastic, but even if you're just playing the OG, like sitting and watching you play the PlayStation 3 version, to me, the game still looks great for something that was fashioned in a way that leans much more into the gritty realism side of things. Because I know there are a lot of times on this show where we've said like, things that are trying to be realistic, they never age well, they end up looking like shit eventually. And in a lot of cases, that's true. But I don't think that's the case here. I think by and large, the game still looks amazing. And like I said, with the remaster, it'll live on for many, many more years. And in my opinion, still look great. And it, for me personally, and this is a very subjective thing, of course, it really does come down to just the overall package that they've presented. I had said at the beginning of my little diatribe here that I've always, to some degree, been into that style. But I'll be honest, I think it was that second go at Dark Souls that really like opened that up for me and like and made me realize that I was like, oh no, like this is my shit. Like that I really like this. So like that's part of why I've gotten into a lot of other things, like artists that I've found that produce this kind of artwork. Like I have a couple of books that I've bought by a particular artist that they basically have created these booklets that are essentially these chunky like manuals for video games that don't actually exist, but they built this whole lore around it and everything. And all of the artwork is very much Dark Souls style, and it's fantastic. And so anyway, I'm just gushing about it at this point, but yes, suffice to say, I really like the graphical presentation of this game. I think everything about it is fantastic.
Okay, I'll go next here. I'm going to take a different tone.
Wow, really?
Than you have.
A shocker.
I know. So again, Keeley put here, I played this on PS3. I played it recently, so I did not play this game when it came out. So a couple things I do want to point out is I think design-wise and how they've incorporated those designs and how they present them in the world, what the monsters look like, what the bosses look like, what NPCs look like. I think they're all very well designed. Aesthetically, design-wise, amazing. I think they look really cool. Very gothic, very dark. Enemies can be grotesque or just interesting. The centipede demon that I mentioned earlier, that is an incredible looking design for a character. And just there's always something interesting about everything that you encounter and how detailed they can be. This game looks like an early PS3 game in 2011. And I say that with the most amount of love that I can, because From Software was not the same developer in 2011 that it is today. They probably did not have the kind of budget that they would be allowed to have with their success in today's world. Yes, they had the Armored Core series, but you can clearly tell like this is not a AAA developed game. The way that the environments look like, the way that the textures look like, the design style that they've chosen does make it look very good. But there is quite a bit of jank when it comes to what you can walk on, what you can't walk on, what's kind of in the environment around you and how it differs. There's some times you can look at that and like that looks a little off, or it looks a little jaggy, or just the overall how it fits into the environment doesn't look quite right. Sometimes in Lost Izalith with the magma, like that magma, I understand it's intentionally doing this way, but it can be just radiate a little too much, where it actually makes it extremely difficult to look at anything on the screen. And I understand that's an element of it trying to be magma, but at the same time, it gets in the way of the experience, which it looks like just watching on some videos to help me get through this. They corrected a lot of that in the remaster, like they dialed it down a little bit. And we have to bring up the fact that there are times in this game where the frames per second drop to like 15 or 10. And it's a slideshow and it's very difficult to get through. Now, I didn't think it was like prohibitively bad. I could make it through, Blighttown wasn't the worst for me, and I think it was because of where I came in. I've heard it's a lot worse in other areas in Blighttown. But what was the area for me? I think it was the area right before Islith, that area where just things at times just came to a crawl. And it was really, really bad in terms of how it was presenting itself. So yes, does the game look visually pleasing? Yes. Does it look dated? Also, yes. It looks like an early PS3 game. Is there reasons I'm willing to accept? Yes. Is it something that makes the game unplayable or extremely ugly? Oh, absolutely not. I still think it's completely adequate if you're playing on the PS3 version. The remaster, of course, fixes a lot of those things. It approaches a lot of those things from what I've seen. I haven't actually played the remaster in real life, but again, it seems more like an up-resed version of what you got on the original versions of these. I mean, you can mod it. I'm sure that could make it a lot better, but it seems like more of a texture update than anything. I might be wrong. I'm willing to be wrong.
Frame rate update for sure.
Frame rate's fixed.
Yeah.
Frame rate's definitely fixed. But aside from that, yeah,
it's more than just a coat of paint. Like I've played through the remaster from start to finish, and like there's definitely improvements and stuff beyond just like the texture updates.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect, because when I compare this to a game like Metal Gear Rising looks far superior to it. Metal Gear Rising came out a little bit later, but I can look at a game like Mass Effect 2 or 3 and I can also say, yeah, that game looks better too. But again, From Software did not have the same budget, so they were working with less, and what they were able to pull off was still incredible. What do you think, Cry?
From Software's actual technology has never been the best. I mean, even to this day, when you have someone like Blue Point Games handling the Demon's Souls remake, the actual technical chops of their engine is a lot more successful than what From Software pulls off with like Elden Ring. But that said, because From Software games, they do have frame rate problems. Humans, they've never made particularly good looking humans. I don't remember if Dark Souls is exactly the same as Demon's Souls, but you can make I'm sure you've seen pictures online of like absolute abominations of characters with like sliders that no one should have ever let sliders go that far in character creation. I don't remember if Dark Souls is the same, but you can make some wild.
Oh, it is.
They look weird. They look weird.
Even your baseline characters, when you don't do anything crazy with them, still look not great.
You can't make a good looking character.
No.
And it doesn't matter because they're a zombie most of the time anyway.
Yeah. And most NPCs you run into are masked. They're wearing helmets.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter that much. But yeah, I mean, From Software has always had technical challenges, but what they do have is great art direction. Great looking enemies, great looking bosses. But more than that, Chris, I thought was interesting. You were talking about like some jank in terms of like, what can I stand on? What can I not stand on? And I was actually thinking beforehand, like one of the things I wanted to say was like, that's always one of my favorite things in games is when I can stand on something that I'm like, should I be able to stand on that?
Yeah.
Can I not? like Super Mario 64 was like really what brought that out to me. It's like, you're not supposed to, like the very tippy tip of Peach's castle. Like, I don't think you're supposed to be able to get up on there, but like you kind of can if you jank your way up to it. Dark Souls is definitely one of those games, or From Software's games in general are games that let you stand on things that in other games would only be part of the environment. And oftentimes you will see something from a distance and have never had any expectation of it being like a platform that you would actually ever be able to get up to. And then as you work your way through the level, you're like, oh my gosh, I see way down there where I came from. I'm up here. And that kind of level design or visual design, since we're talking about graphics, like that kind of does a lot for me. And the thing that really, really does it for me more than anything else with From Software's games is like the geometric detail that is in the level. Like, I don't know if it's actually using like an unusually high number of polygons or anything, but it feels like it is. It feels like, I'm sure there's shortcuts taken where they're using, the same planks of wood here and there and stuff, but it doesn't, the way they design the levels, it doesn't feel like they're taking those shortcuts. It feels like every piece of wood is uniquely made for the exact spot where it is. It feels like every pile of rocks and rubble off the ruins is like very specifically placed there. And that's all part of the design language that makes the world itself so memorable. It makes you just be able to, it doesn't have a map, but it doesn't need a map because the world is designed in such a way that leaves such an impression. Whereas other games that may equally look very beautiful or may even be more technically sound, you still you're like, okay, how do I go back there? And you open up the map and you're opening the map once a minute. Dark Souls, it is so good at making every turn and corner feel like a distinctive part of the world that there was special care and design put into it. It does not have the corridor syndrome, if y'all ever played Castlevania Lament of Innocence,
yep,
yes,
I'm kind of an apologist for that game, but I can't deny that
I love it.
Every room in that game looks exactly the same. That,
yeah.
That's on one of the spectrum, and Dark Souls is on the other, where just every part of the world feels uniquely made. That's what I love the most about it. It feels like there's just so much attention applied to just junk lying around in the world, placed around in ways that make sense and don't feel copy pasted. And it's just all part of making this very, very memorable world. And, that along with the NES style mentality of the game design, those two things coming together are basically the main reasons I love Dark Souls so much. The world design and that gameplay.
Very well said. Yeah.
Yeah. The Dark Souls map, such as it is, I think is one of the few that I could sit down and jot out most of it from memory to you if you ask me to.
Yeah.
And it's because of how well designed it is.
So I think we're all fairly positive on the graphics, unless you're playing out an old system and you go to Blighttown. So watch out for those frames per second. Let's move into the game's oral presentation. How does this game sound? I'll start off with this one because I do need to give a shout out to My Life in Gaming for this game's composer, which I constantly use as a reference. Who the composer is Motoi Sakuraba, and they have lovingly described his music as a cacophony of noise?
A cacophony of epic sounds.
A cacophony of epic sounds. Yes. Cacophony of epic sounds has been described. I actually, in most cases, I agree with that, because especially in the Camelot games, or a lot of the Tales games, it's a lot of melodies that kind of go nowhere.
Yeah, Golden Sun's what I always think of, like the overworld theme, especially in the second Golden Sun. The overworld theme is just it sounds like every epic march ever, and it also sounds like absolutely nothing at all. It's just
yes. But one thing I always give credit to Sakuraba for is he makes epic battle music and epic boss music. And the great thing about Dark Souls is, for the most part, there is no music in this game unless you are fighting a boss.
Mm-hmm.
And almost every single boss encounter had very appropriate and good music. Usually the other thing with Sakuraba is that you can tell that Sakuraba, his variety across most of his titles does not vary. I could not tell you, in Dark Souls at least, if you had just presented the Dark Souls soundtrack to me, I could not off the bat tell you it was Sakuraba. And that's something that almost I could always do in all of the titles, because he is very, very similar across the board.
I managed to figure it out, but it took a while, and it was, y'all have to help me. It was a big boss in the sewers. It was like in
sewers.
it was like I think it was in sewers.
Is it Gaping Dragon?
I think that sounds right. That sounds right.
Yeah.
Like the arena like had water all along the floor.
I think that's Gaping Dragon.
Yes,
I think that's
you're
it.
right.
Yeah, it's a big arena too, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
very big. Yes, that's the one. I remember very specifically. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is Sakuraba. But like up to that point, I did not realize that.
Yeah.
I honestly can't remember off the top of my head. I could probably check the back of my Demon Souls manual, in fact, to see if he did the soundtrack for Demon Souls. If he did, I did not know, because it was definitely a surprise to me when I realized, like, oh my gosh, I know who did the soundtrack in this. Yeah, it looks like he did not do Demon Souls. So yeah, I was like, and you know, it makes sense because Sakuraba does like a whole ton of stuff with Bandai Namco, like, you know, Tales games especially. Yeah, Sakuraba's style for me, it does, you're right. It works in this game because he does very good battle themes, and even though his music is very recognizable, like from one game to the next, like it kind of sounds like one game like is his reject songs from another game. Like,
yeah,
his music is what it is, except it does definitely have a different tone. It fits Dark Souls. It does fit the world. While I generally don't like the approach of, I've always lamented video game music falling more and more and more into the background over the years, especially in Western games where it's all about like, well, the music shouldn't call attention to itself. It should, you know, accentuate the tone or the mood. And I'm like, no, I want to remember this music. I want this music to make an impression. I want to listen to it. I want it to get stuck in my head. That's why I love Japanese game music.
Yes.
But I would say in this case, I would say the approach is the right one, where during the levels, it's all about atmospherics, environmental sound, and it saves, because there is such an emphasis on the bosses in these games. It makes sense to withhold that music, and then it has all the more impact in the boss fight. So even though I'm not the biggest fan of Sakuraba, I can admit he has a lot of talent. He makes very good music, even if his music, my main grief with his stuff is it's just, it all sounds the same, but it sounds less the same in the Souls games.
Absolutely. 100% agree. For music, Shane, what did you think?
Yeah, so I didn't have all of the background information about the composer, as apparently both of you did. But I think the interesting thing about that, though, is that it actually kind of tracks with my experience with Dark Souls, and that is I generally like the music. I do appreciate, and I know I've said this before in other games that we've talked about, but I do really appreciate the purposeful lack of music and it really being utilized to like punctuate the more, you know, important points. I'm actually going to go in a different direction with this, but in a similar sort of like vein, in that the one track that I actually like the most is the Firelink Shrine track, because it's the only one that is not this like big bombastic choir and brass sort of thing. It's very understated. It's very like melancholy, but at the same time, it's very comforting. Like you associate that song with safety very quickly.
It's like the typewriter music of Resident Evil.
Yes, exactly. That's a perfect example. And so like that impact that has is very different, because it's not like the punch to the face of like, oh snap, there's a boss here, but it still has a lot of presence, but for like a very different reason. And so I adore the Firelink track. I think the only thing in the whole Dark Souls series actually that I like more than that is actually the Majula theme from Dark Souls 2, because that track is just chef's kiss. It's like perfect. But I've actually listened to that track on repeat, like just doing work, because it's just great. But yeah, no, definitely Firelink Shrine. And as far as the boss themes go, like it's interesting that both of you have said that this particular composer is like known for stuff being just like, it's kind of the same. And
super
it's
epic.
like it's very epic, but also like totally doesn't have its own identity. And it's funny because that's the feeling I got from it as well, but I didn't know any of like the meta knowledge that you guys do about this. So I guess that tracks, because if you were to ask me like what is the difference between the theme for the gaping dragon fight and the theme for like the Taurus demon, I 100% could not tell you.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I told you I knew specifically. I had this visual in my head of what the boss arena was like when I realized that Sakuraba was the composer. But I don't remember that track. I don't remember what it sounds like. I don't remember the only boss track that like I guess maybe two made an impression. Like the one I was thinking of was the Moth. That one I remember.
Oh yeah, beautiful track.
And I would say the Sif fight as well. I remember that as well. It's the more quieter, more sad boss tracks that actually stand out for me. But you're 100% right about Firelink Shrine. I mean, like that is the one track where it's like, yes, like I can remember, kind of how the notes go in that one. And whereas the others, it's like, it was just cacophony of epic sounds. That's what he does.
I think it's a really good point that you pointed out with the Moth theme and the Firelink Shrine theme, is that when you really look at Sakuraba's body of work, those two themes are really outside of his element. You don't really hear a lot of those more melodic. You might in the Tales themes, for more sad periods, but it wouldn't really fit the atmosphere of a Tales game. I wouldn't see those themes in a Tales game. So this is him. Like when you see Sakuraba outside of JRPG specifically, because that's where he writes most of his music, you start to see Sakuraba's variety. And I think that's why you get more of that here with Dark Souls, because go back and listen to Soldice. It sounds nothing like what you're going to get in Eternal Sonata. And there's a reason for that, because it's a shmup and he's doing different things, much like he's doing here with Dark Souls. Moving on to the other sound design here. I think the rest of the sound design for this game is really good. I think it's a little weird that when you're attacking people with armor, it makes a fleshy sound, no matter what kind of weapon you're using. I mean, it does indicate impact, but overall, like the sound design never really got in the way. I think there are some cool things, like when you're fighting Ulstein and Smo. When Smo attacks, he always has that like goofy little laugh. I like little attention to details like that. We already talked about the voice acting being, kind of unsettling, surreal, the uncanny valley of voice acting, as Shane put it.
That was a great one.
Yes. But outside of that, I think the sound design just fine. It's excellent. I have really no qualms with that, especially the use of silence. I'm a very big proponent that sometimes the best sound is the absence of sound, and Dark Souls does that very, very, very well. So overall, I think the sound design for Dark Souls is incredible. It's top notch, and I couldn't ask for anything different.
Yeah, I don't have a lot specific to say here other than, I really like the backstab sound, just like,
yes.
It's just a very satisfying, like, it really hits that bass, it's just this it makes you want to do backstabs more than the gameplay benefit of backstabs do.
It's very punchy.
Yes.
Oh, same with when you do the parry and you have the attack to counter. That sounds great too.
It didn't motivate me to learn that.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't. It didn't motivate me. It was cool.
Bloodborne, because you will get nowhere at Bloodborne without learning to parry. So
true.
Ooh. Anything to add, Shane?
Honestly, not really. No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I don't really have any qualms that I can think of with the general sound design. I think everything was done exceptionally well. My thing always with the sound design in video games is I never want things to feel flat. And there are a lot of games where that is the case. Fortunately, that is not an issue here, because like I said, I like to use that word punchy, but it really does describe it fairly well. And so having like those real meaningful like impact sounds and giving that sense of weight to things, I think is very important. And I think Dark Souls just in general does that very well. So no, I've always really been satisfied with the sound direction.
All right, outstanding. If we have nothing more to add about the sound, then it's time to start barreling towards the end here. Quick rolling, mid rolling, fat rolling, however you want to roll, whatever you're wearing right now. We are rolling right in there. So hopefully your equipment load is where you want it, because we are going to get into the Patreon pontifications. You might be asking yourself, what is a Patreon pontification? It's where our patrons who are active in our Discord can give an opinion about the game we are talking about for this episode. And all you have to do is, one, you can join the Patreon for as little as $1 a month. That's it, $1. Join our Discord, and then just to pay attention to the channel says Patreon pontifications, where I will tag everyone or here, and we'll say, hey, here's the next game we're talking about. What do you think? So if you're interested in doing that, hey, just go to our link tree, which will be at the end of this episode. So stay tuned for that and find out where to go. And well, it's pretty easy if you just go on Patreon too, but I'm not going to spend too much time pitching that because I want to get to what our patrons are saying. And the first one we are going to be getting to here is from Soha. And Soha says, I have played Dark Souls a couple years ago. I can only say that I don't get it. I don't get what the whole deal with people loving this game and series so much. It's not even that I thought the game was necessarily hard or unfair, except you, Bed of Chaos, go fuck yourself.
Valid.
But it does feel like a game that punishes you for not knowing what to do. Oh, you didn't level your stats properly? Tough shit. Oh, you didn't get this really good weapon that is hidden away by cutting this boss's tail? LMAO. You didn't get access to better spells because you didn't rescue the one dude that unlocks better spells in the game out of Sen's Fortress? Whoopsie. Not that it happened to me, even if I did go for a mage build, but I can see it happening to someone else. It's a game that forces you to get good, but every time I die, I'm required to spend 5 minutes walking back to the boss room to try again. That's an important point that pissed me off too. Should I revise my strategy? Fucking how, if the game doesn't present me viable alternatives? I just don't get it, and I didn't get into it. Thank you, Soha. Not a fan, apparently.
All right. Well, moving on to Tony G. He says, pontificate this. Get good, pussy. Man, we got some good pontifications this time around. Demon Souls was my intro to what dark fantasy could be, and Dark Souls felt like what it should be. The game has great fun bosses and lets you explore a cruel, unforgiving world. I loved diving into a world where nothing is given and every corner had some new challenge. Yes, I probably broke a few controllers, but I got good. I love all the Berserk references, especially probably the best Soulsborne boss, Artorias, in the DLC. Sif is also a close second. And, God, like any altar boy, I was touched by this game and won't ever be the same, for better or worse.
Thank you, Tony G. We appreciate your perspective. On to ParallaxPuddles, and he says, my first time playing Dark Souls was in 2021 with the Switch remaster, and this is my experience. I was told there was a door and there is no door. Found a guy dying in a cell and he gave me something. Got squashed by a large ball, down some stairs, and laughed at by a skeleton. I was squashed by a demonic orc from Dragon Tales. Black Knight ain't having any of my sneak attacks, and some guy was high staring at the sun. I didn't play much of the game to date, but I loved the personality and soft world building that From Software was able to pull off. Thank you, ParallaxPuddles.
All right, up next we have the one and only Dischimera from Game Over Hell, who says, my only impressions of Dark Souls are my brother making the ugliest barbarian possible, getting to the first NPC after the first boss, trying to kill him, and then finding himself in an eternal loop of reloading, being killed, mocked, then reloading, being killed, and mocked again over and over. And then he stopped playing. Now that's just embarrassing. How'd you let me do that to you?
That's right, you can kill NPCs. Well, NPCs can kill you. I mean, you can kill pretty much anybody, like an Ultimate game. But I didn't try doing that. I can tell you that. Okay, next is Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog. I know Dave Jackson is a big Soulsborne fan. In fact, the logo from Tales from the Backlog has a bonfire in it. If that gives you any indication. So here's Dave's take. Playing Dark Souls in 2013 or so totally reshaped the way I think about games, but not in a get good difficulty way. I don't love the game and series for the feeling of triumph over a really tough boss. I love it because From Software are absolute masters of making dense, memorable levels and spaces with meaningful and rewarding exploration. On top of that, the interconnected world design in Dark Souls 1 is a marvel. I would describe Dark Souls 1 as a flawed masterpiece, taking into account how unfriendly it is to new players, but there is an unassailable magic to it. Thank you, Dave.
That sounds a whole lot like what I've been saying this podcast.
Absolutely.
For sure. Let's see. We've got Adam from The Good, The Bad, and The Backlog. And he says, I love Dark Souls. That's all. The lore is tops. I love the dark fantasy vibe. I love the struggle. And I love that when you learn to get over the struggle, you can keep replaying the game, trying new weapons and builds. I will never get tired of playing Dark Souls on a near annual basis. And you know what? I actually think I might be there with you. It's getting close to that for me.
That was actually quite tame for Adam, too. Thank you, Adam.
It is surprising.
All right. Next is Ozzy, our review crew captain. And Ozzy says, maybe the darkest souls are the friends we made along the way. Thank you, Ozzy.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right. And last but definitely not least, we have our very own editor extraordinaire, Ashton. And he says, the only From Software game I played before Elden Ring was Bloodborne, which I gave up on after about an hour of nonstop dying. I recognize this is not an Elden Ring episode, see you guys in 2032, but it is connected, I promise. After finishing Elden Ring, nothing else was waiting for me to play, so I decided that I was going to play the Dark Souls series through for the first time. I started with Dark Souls Remastered in May of 2023. After many, many hours of Elden Ring, I was definitely in a better place to start a FromSoft game this time, compared to when I first tried Bloodborne. I expected a pretty big adjustment, but to my pleasant surprise, it wasn't very hard to convert to Dark Souls 1 gameplay. It had plenty of reasons to be hard aside from that. I really enjoyed playing through all of the Dark Souls games. For me, it was a great example of how our mindsets, understanding what the game is trying to do, and generally where you're at in life is a big part in playing video games.
All right. Thank you, Ashton. And thank you for editing our stuff. This is a really long episode. So, yeah, have fun. All right.
Sorry and thank you.
Yes. I guess this brings us to the conclusion of this episode. And we discuss whether or not this game holds up today. Myself and Shane will go first. And once again, as tradition, our guest will give the final word on whether or not they believe this game holds up today. So I think I'll start this one off, Shane, and I will have you go second this time.
All right.
The hard thing about Dark Souls and saying whether or not this game is held up is because I think there's two different answers here. I really do. If this is the first time you ever played this game, I kind of alluded to it earlier. In fact, I was very direct in that allusion. And that is, if you have a community like I did, if you have a bunch of people around you who have played Dark Souls and are willing to help you out and are not the get good kind of people, because yes, there are plenty of get good toxic Dark Souls players, I'm sure. But from what I understand, the Dark Souls community is one of the friendliest, most helpful, and will give advice on anything you need to do at any time. And they'll do it in an instant because Dark Souls fans love Dark Souls and they want to see other people overcome the challenge that Dark Souls is. And it's a beautiful, wonderful, and amazing thing. And I had that. And so my Dark Souls experience doesn't hold up today. Would I recommend playing it if you are in that circumstance? 100% totally yes. Especially what Try described earlier, that you can summon people to go fight bosses and you can be summoned to fight bosses to learn the game that way. That sounds incredible. You can't do that on the PS3 anymore because they shut the servers down. But you can do that on modern consoles. You can do that on PC with the remastered version if you have that capability. I would imagine that'd be very fun. But in terms of talking about the original PS3 version here, the retro version per se, you need all those things. And don't be afraid to use a guide, because even though a guide's going to tell you what to do, you still have to do it. And you're still going to have friends that are going to advise you on what to do. In fact, that's the best way to play it. Play it old school yard ways of playing it. Get a bunch of friends to talk about what you should do. However, if your friend group has no interest in Dark Souls, has never played Dark Souls, and is not willing to talk to you about Dark Souls, this game has absolutely not held up. You will throw your controller against a wall, you will probably bust up your 360 or PS3, and you'll be upset because replacing an OG PS3 is very expensive, so don't break them. And if you're going to play Dark Souls without a friend group, without a support group that is willing to cheer you along and wish you the best, this is going to be very difficult. So I'm going to say yes, it does hold up with a giant asterisk. That asterisk may be not as giant because there's plenty of people in the community that are willing to be there for you. But this game is extremely difficult, does not tell you what to do, does not hold your hand in any way. And if you do not have that community group, you have to be willing to go look into a guide for it. And it's just not the same as having friends to talk to. So make sure you have that in order for this game to hold up. And that's where I sit on it. Shane?
All right. This is kind of difficult because I'm obviously heavily biased about this, but so I can totally see where you're coming from on that. But I would have to respectfully disagree in that I do think it does still hold up, especially if you're going to jump into the remaster. For all intents and purposes, it basically looks like a brand new game at that point. Some of the design decisions can be a little, hard to get accustomed to if you've never played any FromSoft game. So, like we were talking about, the control layout is admittedly a little wonky at first, although it does get to feel actually surprisingly natural once you're used to it. And as far as the difficulty thing goes, like, it is a bit hostile to new players, especially if you don't have any foreknowledge and you don't have anybody there to guide you, as Chris was saying. But man, overall, I do still feel like this game holds up very, very well, actually. I think some of the jank that comes along with it is... and I know that this is it can be somewhat hypocritical because I know there's definitely instances where we've talked about janky games not holding up for those exact reasons, but there's just something about the overall like package that it kind of feels like it's just part of the experience in a way. With Dark Souls. In a way, it almost feels like it kind of makes sense in that in a game where you're expected to get accustomed to a difficulty curve, it seems sensible that you would also need to get accustomed to like a different control scheme, for example, or things like that. But I would say everybody should at least give it a try. That's where I'm going to land on this, because if it is something that does end up resonating with you, you are going to find an incredible experience that you really cannot find in many other places. The world building and world crafting, which are two separate things here, are exceptional, in my opinion. And From Software really does present you with something that, in my opinion, is special. So I think it's at least worth giving it a shot. It's probably not going to stick with a lot of people, and it's probably not going to have the same effect as it had on me. I mean, hell, like I said, I bounced off it hard the first time, very hard. And it wasn't until I came back around and honestly with maybe a little bit of a different mindset and gave it an honest to God chance that I was just like, okay, I get it now. And so maybe that's what you'll have to do too. But I think everybody should at least give it a shot because it gets all of the praise that it gets for a reason. And I think I already forgot who actually said it, so apologies to who it was in our patron pontifications. But I think flawed masterpiece is like probably the best way I could describe this game, because it is in no way perfect at all. And it has some very rough edges, but there's just so much like loving detail that went into this game on all fronts that it's something that should be experienced. So does it hold up? Yeah, but I don't think it's going to appeal to everybody.
Good take. All right, Try. Bring us home and give us the final word. does Dark Souls hold up today?
Yeah, I think, especially from a world design perspective, it's something that must be experienced, that must be seen. I think, it's one of the best video game worlds ever made, for sure. It's so memorable, it's so distinctive. The way this design just works so well and leaves such an impression. Boss design and stuff like that, some of that it's always been hit or miss. It's not really a question of whether it holds up today. And in some ways, one of the biggest questions in terms of whether it holds up today could be your accessibility to play it online. And I seem to be the only one in the group that really has had that aspect of the experience. Obviously, like you said, on PS3, you can't do that today. I don't know if either of you are aware of any of the details of this, but apparently the servers for the first game, like even on Steam, and I'm not sure what the status on like PS4 and Xbox One is, but like for like a long time, like maybe a couple of years, the servers were down because of some sort of exploit.
Yeah.
You know something about this,
wow.
Shade? And I guess they came back like not super long ago. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. They're back up now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and hopefully they will stay up. Like, I don't know if, they have like an internal roadmap for when they might try to sunset this game or something like that, which would be a shame because that's absolutely part of the experience. It's one of the few types of online game experience that like, not only do I want it at all or am able to tolerate it, but I think it like enhances the game so much because it's not verbal. That makes it such a cool experience that adds so much to the exploration and the boss combat. And if you cannot have that experience, I would possibly take some of your, like Shane, I love the game, but if I didn't have access to that stuff, like you just now with your recent experience with the game, Chris, I could very possibly have similar opinions to you. I could walk away with a similar take if that was my experience. And it's also important to remember, up until Sekiro, which doesn't have online anyway, and then Elden Ring, which I still haven't played, like I played all of these Miyazaki games at or near launch. I mean, maybe the original Demon's Souls, it took me a little bit to get to it, but not that long. So my point is, I also had an experience where not only was I playing it online, but I was also playing it online when it was new, when people were figuring it out. And that was a different experience than what you would get years later. That's a different experience than you'll get if you're playing it offline. It's a radically different experience. So obviously, there always is the get good solution, get good. I guess the game could hold up for anyone if they get good, but there could be more barriers to many people, depending on how able they are to play it online. But I would say people shouldn't be discouraged by the notion of not playing with friends, because I do think that's a unique experience. The design of that works so well for just playing with random people without the annoyances that normally come around with that. Some friends of mine are actually, I'm not sure if they've started it yet, but now that the servers are back, they're going to play through it the first time. And one of those friends actually had started it years ago. NES is his favorite console, just like mine. We both love going through our backlog and, working through, some of those tough as nails games that require a lot of memorization. And I was actually kind of shocked how kind of iffy he was on the game the first time he gave an attempt. And now he and his wife are kind of attempting to co-op through it together. So I'm hoping that they'll walk away from it with a positive experience. But of course, playing with a specific person is going to be a different experience from playing with random people here and there. So yeah, it's a game that the experience is going to change so much depending on whether you play online or offline, and when you play it online and how you play it online. it's a game of such variable potential experiences. But just as, if nothing else, as a game world, as a game that creates a compelling and memorable atmosphere, that part I think is ageless. So I absolutely think it holds up in that regard, but people are absolutely just going, from a gameplay perspective, are going to have highly variable experiences.
Well put. All right. Thank you very much, Try. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for contributing your thoughts. And I don't think I'm going to say thank you one more time. I'm just going to do that. But I guess this is the time where we can officially wrap the show up and roll out. Going to let Try say where you can find him on the internet, but I'm just going to give before that My Life in Gaming. So they have a fantastic episode out at the time of recording, the most recent one, about their favorite accessories. I know we have a lot of people in our Discord community that are looking for the latest and greatest about how to enhance their retro experience in the modern era. And that video is very current, has a lot of fantastic products. If you have a bottomless wallet, maybe you can get everything. I know I wish I did after watching that, but it is a fantastic take. But I've made some recommendations to some of you based off that video. So definitely go check that out. And in order to check that out, Try right here will tell you where you can find his stuff on the internet. So Try, take it away. Where can we find you, man?
Yeah, it's just, youtube.com/mylifeingaming. Me and my friend Corey run the channel. It's been a little slower this year, but we're finally getting back into the groove. Finally got a lot of stuff in the works. Been working hard on a RetroTink 4K preview episode. Very excited about that. Yeah, we also stream on the YouTube channel every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. We usually go till about 11 or 11:30. I mean, that's pretty much it. I'm not on social media basically like at all, so don't go looking for me there. I am also one of the co-founders of a backlog collection tracking site called the Backloggery, and we also do Twitch streams at twitch.tv/backloggery. We do those every Monday from 7 to 11 p.m. Eastern time. Most of the time we're trying to work through our backlog. That's pretty much the extent of my online activities.
Awesome. Also, if you continue to pay attention to the Retro Hangover podcast, which we hope you do, you might be hearing more of Try in the near future as well, especially if you're a patron. So stay tuned. All right, over to you, Shane.
Well, it's like you just teed that up for me. Speaking of that, as far as we are concerned, if you are listening to the dulcet tones of our voice, then that means you have already found us. You done the hard part. You did the legwork. So congratulations. I'll give you a second. Go ahead. Pat yourself on the back. Okay, very good. We're glad that you're here. We hope you enjoyed this episode. This is a beefy boy. Let me tell you what. This is probably the biggest episode we've done in quite a long time. So we hope you enjoyed it.
Indeed.
That's the consequence of taking me on here.
Oh no. More content. Happens. Whatever are we gonna do?
Not more of that.
Yeah. But you know what? If you're new here, then we're glad to have you. We hope you enjoyed listening, and we want you to go ahead and check out our burgeoning backlog of episodes. Incredibly, we are encroaching upon like 250 at this point, which is nuts. But there we are. So plenty of content for you to check out. And so you can find that, as well as the aforementioned Patreon and perhaps our merch store and our socials and all that fun stuff in one convenient place. We made it easy for you. All you got to do is head over to Linktree/Retro Hangover. That's linktr.ee/Retro Hangover. All the good stuff is there. And we also happen to have a link to our very own Twitch channel. And Chris, where can the fine people find us over there, and what time should they arrive?
Well, hey, you could find us over at twitch.tv/Retro Hangover, where we're going to be directly competing with My Life in Gaming over on YouTube. Good news is you can watch both at the same time. But
true.
We start at 9 p.m. Eastern time over at twitch.tv/Retro Hangover on Sunday night. So if you want to head over there and see what we're up to, yeah, feel free, stop by. Great community, great discussions. goes off the rails quite frequently. So if you like that kind of stuff, yeah, stop on by. Shane might be playing some spoopy stuff. I might be playing whatever's crawling up my butt that day. Who knows? But you can only find out if you go to twitch.tv/retrohangover at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday. And we hope to see you there.
Well, I suppose with all of that being said,
Much said.
Until next time,
play with your, I swear to God, it didn't hit me. That's bullshit, joysticks.
Shane here with a quick message. You know, the one rule Chris and I have always gone by regarding advertisements is this. It has to be something we use and can personally vouch for. If you know me, you know I love coffee. And Bones Coffee Company has been my go-to for home brewing for quite some time now. Their small batch beans come in an impressive variety of flavors like Mint Invaders from Chocolate Space, or Electric Unicorn, which I swear tastes exactly like Fruity Pebbles. And the best part? No added sugar or calories involved, just natural flavors infused right into the beans themselves. Build your own sample pack of 5 4-ounce bags to find out which flavors speak to you, or jump in head first with full 12-ounce bags. They've even got K-Cups. Step up your homebrew game with Bones Coffee by visiting bit.ly/RHPBones. That's bit.ly/RHPBONES.